No way. Good grief. Are you joking? That can't be true. My goodness, I wonder if it'll even go ahead now. I wish I was in the congregation for that. What? Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just reading my emails. It is 3 minutes after 10. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention first this morning to an absolutely extraordinary story that I'm afraid is yet more evidence of my journalistic instincts being fair to middling at the very best. It was on Tuesday that the newspaper reported reports that Robert Jenrick, a Home Office minister, fondly known as Honest Bob Jenrick by fans of sarcasm and satire, had ordered staff at an asylum centre, a children's asylum centre, to paint over murals on the grounds that they were too welcoming. Now, it was somebody who I think had reportedly accompanied him on that trip around the centre that had given the instruction, but that individual was reluctant to be interviewed or to go on the record. And I'm a big fan of the newspaper, as you know, a huge fan actually. I think it is doing a fantastically good job in an incredibly necessary field. But I don't know why. I think I just thought it just can't be true. I think I just thought it can't be true. It's so crass and so obviously awful behaviour that I found myself thinking, this must be a miscommunication. It must be that they're simply tarting them up a bit, or there's another explanation. And I should have trusted the journalists on the newspaper. They wouldn't have got something like this wrong. But I work from a slightly different palette in the morning. So, I'm looking for things that, A, we can talk about, and B, that are interesting. If you need conclusive proof of how wrong I got it on Tuesday, Sheila Fogarty waltzed into the studio at 1 o'clock and dived straight into this story to devastating and powerful effect. But I think I naively... Do you know what happened? Come here a minute. I'll tell you what happened. I didn't want it to be true. I so desperately didn't want it to be true that I convinced myself it might not be. I do not want to live in a country where a senior government minister orders cartoon characters on the wall of an asylum centre in Kent for unaccompanied children to be painted over because they create too welcoming an environment. I don't want to live in that country. And it turns out I do. So on Tuesday, I let you down. I referred to it at the top of the show, and I said, and there is a story. I referred to it quite obliquely. I don't think I gave you much detail. And I said, I just can't believe it. So we're going to give Robert Jenrick the benefit of the doubt this morning, because I cannot believe that this story will be as gross as it appears to be. But it is. Yesterday, the Home Office confirmed that the murals had been removed on Tuesday, the day that the published its initial story. Mr. Jenrick told staff at the Kent Asylum Intake Unit, a bespoke building designed especially to meet the needs of lone asylum-seeking children, to paint over the art in April. I'm going to read that again, because sometimes, some days, some mornings, you've got to pin your ears back and recognise what we've become. Not what we are becoming, not what we will become if we don't halt the direction of traffic soon, but what we have become. We have a Home Secretary, of course, who dreams of the front pages applauding her for deporting these children, potentially, to Rwanda. But here it is. Mr. Jenrick told staff at the Kent Asylum Intake Unit, a bespoke building designed especially to meet the needs of lone asylum-seeking children, to paint over the art in April. The minister felt the murals gave the impression that the UK was welcoming to asylum seekers who crossed the channel in small boats, sources said. We had, what were they called? What were those characters called? It will come to me in a minute. With Charlie and Lola. We had Charlie and Lola decals on our walls, like stickers, big stickers that you could put up. And the kids loved them. Different generations will have had different characters, wouldn't they? You know, the idea, you go to the doctors in the little corner of the doctor's surgery that's reserved for children, and there'll be a nice picture on the wall, a couple of paintings maybe on the wall, cartoon characters, a little table with some Lego on it, or a few toys, a desperate and sometimes quite forlorn attempt to make the place more welcoming for children. And that'll be children who haven't got post-traumatic stress disorder, who haven't fled war or famine and not been in contact with their families for weeks or months, who've been through untold hells and privations in pursuit of just this notion of security and safety that the United Kingdom still somehow manages to represent in some corners of the globe. And then they get here, and Robert Jenrick thinks that a picture of Tom and Jerry on the wall is too much, too kind, too warm, too welcoming. Now, there are mornings when I lump people in together. There are mornings where I would generalise fairly bluntly about people who, for example, support Suella Braverman's despicable Rwanda deportation scheme, although it would appear there aren't that many of them. Certainly didn't appear to be any in the Question Time audience a couple of weeks ago. But I'm not going to do that today. I don't care what you and me have disagreed about in the past. I really don't. You might be still the biggest Brexiter in Britain. You might think still that Boris Johnson was worthy of your support and your vote. You may be immune to all of the evidence that you've been conned on a scale that British politics has never seen before. You may even be a fan of Nigel Farage. You can't support this. You don't support this. Nobody supports this. So how do we talk about something where I honestly believe, possibly a couple of performative applications to Idiot's Corner notwithstanding, I honestly believe we'll be pretty close to unanimous. I mean, even if you don't want unaccompanied children to come here because perhaps their uncle lives here or their family member has made a life here and they can find shelter in their homes. Even if you don't want that, you can't possibly think that news is going to filter back to Kabul or Calais, that there are no longer any Tom and Jerry cartoons on the wall of the Children's Asylum Processing Centre in Kent. Therefore, these two boys, these two children are no longer going to make the journey. Oh no, let's not do that anymore. They've taken down the pictures of Mickey Mouse or Tom and Jerry or whoever it may have been. 11 minutes after 10 is the time. So how do we do it? Imagine if this was another country. In fact, someone's made that point already. Imagine if we heard this, says Chris, if it was China or Russia or North Korea. I genuinely hate the people here who lie and call themselves public servants, adds Chris. I tell you what, if this was happening in another country, we'd probably be hearing from Amnesty International already. We'd be doing some sort of fundraising in order to get some money down to Kent to help them put the walls, put the murals, put the cartoons back up on the walls. We would, wouldn't we? If this was in, a behind the Iron Curtain type country, if it was an orphanage in communist Bulgaria, and the news filtered out, maybe I don't know, maybe John Simpson went in and did a report, and the news filtered out that this bleak vista where desperate, vulnerable children are more or less confined had been rendered even less welcoming by a political decision to remove a few cheery cartoons from the walls. And I came on the radio the next morning and said, let's just raise a few quid, shall we, for this Bulgarian orphanage. Let's send a few quid to Bulgaria and make sure we get some pictures back up on the walls by tea time. We can do this. We can sort this out. We would, right? Except it's not happening behind the old Iron Curtain or in Kim Jong-un's North Korea. It's happened in Kent. And it's happened upon the orders of a Conservative minister, a member of Parliament, a Home Office bigwig. The minister felt the murals gave the impression that the UK was welcoming to asylum seekers who crossed the channel in small boats. Yesterday's confirmation that the murals had been removed came after 3 days of repeated inquiries to the Home Office. 3 days. What's wrong with Robert Jenrick? 0345 60 60973. I wondered whether I would ask you another brilliant point. It's exactly what the Taliban do in Afghanistan, isn't it? It's idolatry, or there'd be sort of fundamentalist religious reasons for the Taliban to do it. I find it easier to get my head around why the Taliban would take down cartoons from children's facilities in Kabul than I do to get my head around the idea of a Conservative Home Office minister doing it here. I was going to do something, maybe I should, but I balked at it because it was so bleak a question to hit you with at 13 minutes after 10 on a cheery Friday morning. I wondered how you'd explain it to your own children. Actually, let's do it like that. How would Robert Jenrick, does he have children? Can we check? How would Robert Jenrick explain this to his own children? 0345 6060 973. So, a couple of little Jenricks, 3 little Jenricks, see the news today. In the back of the car, breaking up. Mum doesn't turn it down quick enough. They hear O'Brien banging on as usual about their dad ordering the removal of cartoons from a asylum centre, a bespoke building designed especially to meet the needs of traumatised, terrified, vulnerable children, lone asylum seekers. And their dad gave the order to paint over the pictures. And they turned to their mum, perhaps, or later today to their dad, and they said, why? Why? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. How would they explain it to their children? Because I'm not sure that I could explain it to mine. The reason I say that is not because the words don't exist. I could explain it. I'm not sure I'm ready to introduce... Well, they're 17 and 15 now, but when they were younger, I'm not sure I would want to in any way introduce them to the fact that they live in a country governed by people possessed of opinions like this. I'm not sure I could do it in a way that didn't... Traumatise is too strong a word. What's the right word? I'm not sure I could explain this story, this decision, this man, to my children in a way that didn't upset them more than I would want to do. I don't think I could do it. 0345 6060 973. How would you do it? How would you explain it? And if that is too high a hill for you to climb this morning, not sure I can climb it. Let's just have a look at what's wrong with him. What's wrong with him? Because I sometimes say to you, the cruelty is the point. You've heard me say that a few times. Trump, I think, was the person about whom it was said with the most certainty. The cruelty is the point. It's the people like the cruelty. The cruelty is the point. But this, I don't think this fits into that category. Braverman means it. Braverman lives it. Braverman dreams it. This dude would be to the left of Keir Starmer if he thought it would advance his career. He'd be to the left of Jeremy Corbyn. He'd be to the left of, I know you say John Lennon, but the Russian fella, Lenin. He'd be to the left of Lenin if he thought it would advance his political career. That level of grasping opportunism is the only other qualification you need to advance in today's Tory party, other than the sort of base nastiness of a Suella Braverman. So he's not doing it. It's not like there was a newspaper campaign to tear down these murals. Even the Daily Mail wouldn't stoop that low. Asterisk. I hope. No, hand on heart, I couldn't even imagine Sarah Vine writing an article about how disgusting it is that these terribly traumatised children have a few pictures of a few cartoon characters on the wall in their specially built, their bespoke building designed especially to meet the needs of lone asylum-seeking children. Even that, think of the worst columnist in the country. We'll be here a while. Even they wouldn't write an article about why we must paint over these murals. Paint over them now. 12 pages. 12 days of Daily Mail front pages. Paint over the murals. We're sick of these murals. They wouldn't do it, would they? So why has he done it? What's going on in his head when he walks into that room? He's not going to get any brownie points for it. Is he too thick to understand That nobody's going to turn around and shake him by the hand and say, nice one, honest Bob. That'll teach those traumatised children not to get into those death trap boats after traversing half of the world in pursuit of a semblance of security that they have somehow clung to the notion we might offer or provide. What's gone through what passes for his brain? I'm not allowing him the possibility of a conscience. Sorry. There can't be one there. There can't be a conscience. Just the brain, just the mind, just the consciousness. It pops into his head, I know what I'll do now. I'll tell him to paint over these murals. I'll tell him to paint over. And then he turns to someone, another human being, and says with his actual mouth, this is too welcoming. We've got to paint over these murals. What the hell happened to him? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Because I don't think it's a posture. I don't think it's a political point score. I think it's something much, much sicker than that. I really do. I could be wrong. If I am, you'll tell me. But the two questions I would invite you to try to answer this morning is how will they explain it to their own children? Mr. and Mrs. Jenrick, 0345 6060973. And probably a little bit easier to have a swing at early doors. What the hell is wrong with him? It is 22 minutes after 10. I can tell you, if you're worried about the state of human nature at the moment, that a cartoonist called Guy Venables, I know some of his work, Private Eye, Spectator, we won't hold that against him, Punch, back in the day, is trying to put together some sort of joint effort to replace the murals, to put up new paintings at the refugee centre in Dover. We wish him well, but I presume he'd need permission from the Home Office, and the Home Office minister who ordered the murals to be painted over is your friend and mine, honest Bob Jenrick. 22 minutes after 10. How do you explain that to your own children? Or how would they, Mr. and Mrs. Jenrick, she, I'm told, is the daughter of Holocaust survivors. She puts an even grimmer slant on the story, doesn't it? How do you explain that to your own children? Why have you done that, Daddy? Why has Daddy done that? Anne's in Southbourne, near Chichester. Anne, what would you like to say?
James, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much. I was discussing with my good friend yesterday what we could do about this, because Robert Jenrick may not be allowed to get away with treating children in this way. Never mind traumatised, terrified children in this way. Absolutely not. Now, my idea is that we widely publicise what he's done as far as we can on every platform. I'm thinking Mumsnet, I'm thinking Facebook, I'm thinking schools, and we get children...
Threads, all about Threads this weekend.
Whatever.
Yes,
to draw pictures for these children, because the children of this country do not want the children of other countries to be terrified and traumatised. As for your question, what's wrong with Robert Jenrick?
Yes.
God knows. God knows.
Well, can you have a go? Have a go. No, but let pause for a second. Let me tell you what I mean by that, because Braverman wants Daily Telegraph front pages. So her callousness, her cruelty is performative and probably real. She does dream of this, partly because she thinks it will propel her up the popularity stakes within the membership of the Conservative Party, if not the parliamentary party or the broader country. So I can get my head around that. The Home Office has spent 3 days trying to squash this story, so he's not done it for points. What's he done it for?
I don't know, personal popularity amongst the ghouls that he works with every day.
But they wouldn't really know, I don't think. I mean, they've tried to keep it quiet, and the Home Office, the civil servants in the Home Office, will be just as disgusted as you are. The people working in the asylum centre will be heartbroken by this. What went through his head in that moment?
Well, I don't know. Has he just gone completely mad?
That's a fair question, I suppose.
I mean, I've tried to think why. Yeah. What's the gain? What's the gain for this imbecile to do this ridiculous cruelty, this pantomime? It is ridiculous,
pantomime cruelty. That's the point, isn't it? Because there's no purpose to it, even on a personal level. You can see the purpose of Suella Braverman's posturing and her being photographed cackling outside a facility in Rwanda.
And hateful as it is,
yeah, exactly that. But what is this? What is this? What is he? It's just bizarre. I wish you well. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. I don't know I think you'll speak for many people where you feel that there has to be some sort of outlet for it's just disgust, actually. I think rage is almost paying him a compliment. You know, the kind of person who says, oh, it's upsetting all the right people. It's disgust. It's just disgust. It's as if you tread in dog mess and then the dog mess claims that it's upsetting all the right people. Do you see what I mean? It's not anger or rage. That's there. But it's utter disgust. It's abject disgust. Robert Jenrick. 0345 6060 973. How do you think he or his wife will explain to their children why Daddy ordered murals in a building designed especially to meet the needs of lone asylum-seeking children? Why did Daddy order staff to paint over the welcoming cartoon murals? Vicky's in Oxford. Vicky, what would you like to say?
I think that it's Robert Jenrick, why they didn't want to say too much about it. It was him going and telling the people who are working in that asylum centre, look, this is how we treat the children here. Oh. No need to be too nice to them. These are just children we're going to try and get rid of as soon as possible. No, we don't want them having cartoons. We don't want them having a good time. And so, unfortunately, that sent a completely wrong message to the people who are working in that centre.
Well, it's backfired, I think. I hope. Don't you?
Yes. I don't know. Has anybody spoken to any of the people who were there?
Not yet, but my phone lines are open. 0345 6060 973. The thing is, yes, you're right. It is as if he's turned up there and he's sort of trying to stiffen their resolve or make them more unpleasant or make them... some of these centres have already seen children disappear on a scale that in a normal country would be in the news every day, but not in this country. So but the thing is,
when they say purpose-built, it's probably meant to be much more like a detention centre, isn't it?
I don't know.
Some of them have been put up in hotels before. When they
this is where staff
not only abscond but also be trafficked.
Of course,
again.
they can be spirited away. Staff, it's where staff find out what has happened to the children in order to make decisions about their future care. So the idea, listen, if we were to be completely clear-eyed about it, and we could just about conceive of the notion of trying to create a deterrent, which is what some people pretend to believe about the Rwanda deportation plan. It doesn't even work in that category, does it? There's no way the message is going to filter back to Kabul or Calais that they've painted over the Mickey Mouse mural, so there's no point trying to get to Kent anymore. It's ridiculous.
Oh, absolutely ridiculous.
Vicky, thank you. It is 10:28. How would you explain? I don't think a few of you pointing out, this is one of those phone-ins where I set it up in such a way that guarantees no one will ring in to answer the question that I'm asking. But that's why we've got the other question bubbling under as well, or bubbling over, actually, to be fair, of what the hell is wrong with this man? What is wrong with this man? What was he thinking, in your opinion? Because the idea of how you'd explain it, how they would explain it to their own children is absolutely, I think, impossible to conceive of. Although I want you to take that as a challenge, not a discouragement. It's coming up to 10:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question is probably one of the nastiest, saddest, grimmest questions I've asked you in all the years that we have spent our mornings together. When Robert Jenrick gave the order for murals at a child asylum centre in Kent to be painted over because apparently he felt they were too welcoming, what on earth was he thinking? Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It's 10:33. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Dear James, my father was a kinder transport child. He arrived at Harwich to welcoming arms, circus acts and fun games to welcome the kids at Warner's holiday camp. It's all documented in the film Into the Arms of Strangers, the story of the kinder transport. My father features in the film. Send Robert Jenrick a copy and see what he thinks then. Well, I don't know. I think we're doing that thing we do all the time when we're presented with callousness that we can't quite comprehend. We're thinking of them as being like us. Oh, there must be a point at which you'd think, this can't be right, this can't be fair, There must be a point at which you'd recognise how other people respond to the same stimuli that you respond to by calling for cartoons to be painted over. I don't know. I hope you're right. You don't like to think of anyone as being unreachable, but if history has taught us anything, it's that very, very ordinary people can end up doing the most extraordinary, awful things. And in the great scheme of things, painting over murals don't fit into that category, doesn't fit into that category. But goodness me, it feels to me, it feels like the political equivalent of when we learn that serial killers used to pull the wings off butterflies in their youth. Do you see what I mean? It's like a baby step to atrocity. And painting over, wow, you know the story. Steve's in Gould. Steve, what do you reckon?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
How are you this morning?
Well, I'm disgusted, actually, but I'm not in Tunbridge Wells.
I have listened to your show for many years.
Thank you.
I'm a truck driver, so you don't get much chance to call, so this is the first time I've called.
Excellent.
I had to pull over because out of all the 13 years of utter sleaze and disgust, I cannot comprehend the mentality of what this man, and I'll put that in brackets, has done. It's appalling, but I'm more disgusted, I'm not disgusted, but disappointed that the management of the centre, even though they tried their hardest, I believe 3 days, they tried.
No, it was done on Tuesday, but the order came through in April, so I don't know what toing and froing there has been. But
I'd have walked, and I'd have said, don't swear, keep your job. I cannot possibly work for somebody.
But then who
like
looks after
you.
But then who looks after the children?
Oh, I'm sure that they filled it with somebody that would.
Yeah, but that's the point, isn't it? That's the point. What you've got that absolutely uncontrollable urge to do something. I have to do something in this situation. I'm going to stick up for them. And I'm going to say I would not make this situation better by removing myself from this position.
But I'd have made the story earlier.
Yeah. Well, it did get out in the end.
And to be honest with you, this is what disappoints me now about this elected minister or whatever he is. You asked the question, what was he thinking? He probably wasn't. He's probably just been told to do that, and he's just gone along with it.
I doubt that. I just can't think about it because I hope this doesn't bore people. This desperate attempt to try to understand people who are doing things that you can't understand. We can usually get halfway there at least, Steve. I know why Braverman wants to, whether she wants to deport people to Rwanda or not. I know why she wants to be seen as trying to. I know why she dreams of
children.
Yes,
children.
But this
children.
Yeah, there's a painting over there. It looks a bit cheery. Scrub it out. Go on, scrub it out.
I say I've seen a lot since. I'm in my 60s. I'm late 50s. Good God, I'm old.
Nearly there. Don't wish your life away,
no,
Steve.
Definitely not. I've seen an awful lot in politics since I got involved back in the 80s.
Yeah.
But this is as low as it gets.
All right,
I can't possibly imagine how low it gets.
Here's a theory, right? I haven't got the popular. The numbers. But if you want to be the next leader of the Conservative Party, and obviously they're already jockeying for position in expectation of losing the next general election, if Braverman is producing the goods among this membership, this grim cohort of Conservative members, if she's producing the goods, and I'd need to check the numbers, then but no, because Jenrick didn't want it to come out. You see, every time I come up with a theory, it falls apart under scrutiny. It's beyond analysis. Because you wouldn't spend 3 days trying to sit on it if Jenrick wanted it in the public domain. He'd be out defending it and hoovering up support from the kind of people that think Suella Braverman is wonderful.
Yeah, I think the difficult thing is for your. I'm not Conservative.
No,
I did vote Conservative once many years ago.
Yeah,
and I won't tell you who it was, but it was a male.
Okay.
But anyway, I feel sorry for your average Conservative voter that must be looking at this and going, how can I possibly ever vote Conservative again?
Well, they're listening.
How can I?
And they're probably ringing in as well. No, because that's what I said at the beginning, and I went much further than your average Conservative voter. I said, even if you're a Nigel Farage fan or a Boris Johnson cheerleader, there's got to come a point where you say, not in my name. There's got to be a point where you say, this isn't right. You know, whatever your views are about immigration in general, you don't do this. They're already here. This tiny little crumb of comfort in a context of bleakness and horror, loneliness and trauma, this tiniest of crumbs of comfort. Get rid of it, please. I'm honest Bob Jenrick. Take away the crumb of comfort. Oh, what a scumbag. So, thank you, Steve. Take care. Make sure you calm down a bit before you get back behind the wheel. I mean that, actually. I'm not being glib. I don't want you driving off in your juggernaut with your blood still boiling. Terry's in Greenwich. Terry, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
James, I spoke to you just after Grenfell as a firefighter.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember.
Of course I do, yes.
These children, that this, whatever he is, wants to just take any bit of comfort away from. They're just like them people we got out of that building, you know?
Yeah.
We didn't look at them as anything but kids.
Sure.
And I think Angela Rayner summed it up a couple of years ago, and the reason why they do it, they're just scum, James. I don't know if I can say that, but
you have now.
They just prove that they are. Well, I think I just followed you. I think you mentioned scumbag, didn't you?
Yeah, him specifically, though. I wouldn't. I mean, maybe I'm being I'm clutching my pearls a bit.
Just say some of them.
Yeah.
Just say some of them. But they're just following, and the reason they're doing it is because they're following the Trump playbook.
Yes.
To energise their moronic base.
Well, except I keep coming back to this. I like that phrase, energise their moronic base. I keep coming back to the fact that
You're welcome. You can use that.
you know I will, Terry. But I keep coming back to the fact that he didn't seem to want it to be out there. They've spent 3 days denying it. Home Office pushing back, 3 days of repeated inquiries, but yesterday it was finally confirmed. I presume because they've got pictures or something. So if it doesn't quite fit as neatly into that playbook as it might, because Trump wouldn't try to keep it secret. That's where the cruelty is the point comes in.
But I don't understand how they had the power to actually say to it. Is it some sort of a reception centre or something?
So it'd be a Home Office centre. It's a children's bespoke building designed especially to meet the needs of lone asylum-seeking children. So it's theirs.
I was just spitting when you just read that out in your introduction.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I didn't do it on Tuesday because I thought this will turn out not to be as grim as it shows. What I know, I should have listened to Sheila. She weighed straight in on. But I honestly thought 10 o'clock Tuesday morning, it can't be what it looks like. This story. There's still a tiny little bit of me that hopes it's not. You know, because we live here.
Yeah, I can understand when people get the ump about, you know, the boats, etc. When we see all fighting age males, and I don't know whether that's true. I get all that.
If you say working age males, it reaches your ears a little differently, Terry. Yeah. But I take your point.
This is just they can't go no. To me, they can't go no lower than this. No, I can't go any lower.
Don't worry, that sounds like a challenge, Terry.
Bring Boris back, you'll soon find out.
Well, Lord above, there it is. And that is, I mean, maybe it is. If it's not real, if it's not authentic, if it is just pantomime, what do I need to be? What do I need to be to get ahead? How do I get my poll rating improved? How do I become the most popular minister among members? I'm the immigration minister. Suella's got her fingerprints all over Rwanda. I can't have any of that. She's like one of those people that eats their lunch with their arm curled around their plate. She's never going to share. She's got the Rwanda. So I need to. But he didn't seem to want the story to come out, which just makes it even harder to understand. Max says a potential Daily Mail headline, but he didn't seem to want the story to come out, which means it's sicker, almost sicker in some sense than it would have been if it was posturing, pantomiming, posing. Aida is in Heathrow. Aida, what would you like to say?
Hello. Hi, James.
Hey.
So I was prompted by listening to this. I hadn't heard the story before.
No.
But
I'm sorry for bringing it to your attention in a way.
That's all right. But I came to England in the early 90s from Bosnia without my parents as an asylum seeker.
Yes.
And the first 3 weeks, I think it was, spent in an asylum centre. Now,
how old were you?
When I was 13, just turned 13.
Right.
So now I feel as British as anyone. I absolutely love this country.
Of course.
And it is actually, if I reflect on it, it is the experience I had for the first 2-3 weeks, when for the first time you feel, after everything you've been through, you feel safe and you feel welcomed and you feel like somebody cares and you will be taken care of. That sows the seeds for you to start feeling that love for the country that you've arrived in. So it wasn't, you see things that removing Mickey Mouse posters or whatever it was is what the kids are coming for.
Sure.
That would put them off. It is coming to a place of safety. And if little things like that would make you feel more welcome and make you feel more just happier place.
Oh, well, do you know,
it's shocking.
It reminds you you're a child, because what you've been through should have nothing to do with childhood or adulthood for that point, but especially childhood. Yeah. And then here you are.
Yeah, I always say I became an adult at the age of 13.
Yes, there it is.
Or the age of 12. And if you can just save that childhood for a little bit longer, I have no idea how I would explain this to my children now. So I hope they don't hear it.
No, I'm not going to ask you, given what you've been through, to imagine how he might explain it to his. But I can't even begin to get the first thread of a defence of this. Do you see what I mean? In the way that you can see the optics, you can see the politics with other actions, things you hate, even Farage's Nazi poster. You can see exactly what they're trying to do. This just feels like he doesn't care whether anybody ever finds out. He wants children like you to feel even more lonely and frightened than you do already.
It's how you treat them when they first come that has such a foundational component to what they will feel for this country and how much they'll want to contribute to it as they grow older.
It's so simple when you put it like that, and yet so completely beyond the ken of people like Robert Jenrick.
Because you make them feel like outsiders on day one, they'll feel like outsiders for the rest of their time here. It's harder then to bring them inside.
That's beautifully put. And I mean,
I'm tempted to buy all the pictures and all the posters that I can find and send them all to the centre.
Get down that. Well, I would be amazed if there wasn't some pushback on this. But of course, it is not going to get the coverage of Keir Starmer having a curry or the things that the right wing media like to get very exercised about. It would, I think, if it happened in another country, it would possibly get more coverage in the UK media, because it would allow them to portray themselves as being morally superior to Johnny Foreigner. But not on this occasion. Aida, you remind us of what we used to be and what people like Robert Jenrick have made us become. It's 10:46. 10:49 is the time. I still not really got a clue, except, of course, the sense of personal joy that he might have derived from doing it. I don't think anyone has risen to the challenge of imagining how he might explain it to his own children. Imagine they were to hear that the specially built building designed especially to meet the needs of lone asylum-seeking children, like our last caller, Aida, who arrived here at 13 from Bosnia, spent 3 weeks in a centre like this. And Robert Jenrick's children discovered today that their dad gave the order to paint over some cheerful murals on the grounds that it made the place too welcoming. And they just say, why, Dad? Why? Why'd you do that, Dad? No one is having a crack at trying to answer that question as things stand, and frankly, I can't blame you. But as to what the hell is wrong with him, you're left with two possibilities. He is utterly devoid of conscience, and that doesn't quite work because of the publicity angle, so he just did it for personal pleasure. He did it because he could. Well, he just likes hurting people. Desperate people, vulnerable people, traumatised people, better. Young people, even better. Children, the younger the better. The younger they are, the more traumatised they are, the more fun I have in hurting them or making their lives measurably worse. I'm Robert Jenrick. Vote for me. Gosh. Nick's in Nottingham. Nick, what would you like to say?
Yeah, g'day, James. I'll try and repeat more or less ad verbatim what I said to your producer.
Thank you.
He's told us exactly what he wants and who he is through these actions. He's done the opposite.
Gonna have to sort your phone line out. I'm so sorry, because I can tell your feelings are running high, but there's a really horrible clicky thing on your phone, and if I give you the time I sense you need, then it's going to drive people potty. So we'll try and get back to you shortly. I promise. James is in Birchington-on-Sea. James, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, mate.
I'm 5 minutes down the road from this centre, and it breaks my heart. I have a family. I have 3 children, 4, 5 and 13, and we have to drive past this centre very, very frequently. Obviously, I haven't told the 4 and the 5-year-old what's going on there. They're far too young to understand, but my 13-year-old is abundantly aware. And ultimately, this is intentional cruelty from Robert Jenrick. He knows what he's doing. He's not a stupid person. People don't get to where he has got to without some kind of intelligence. This is intentional cruelty, and he really doesn't care. He is inhuman. And actually, I think anybody who complies with that order to paint over this mural is morally bankrupt too.
I'd struggle a bit with that, but you're pushing me towards the "I was only following orders" defence, aren't you? But it's
which I don't think works. I mean, Robert Jenrick again.
But what are you going to do? You're going to give up your own job and not be in a position to help these children anymore?
Do you know, I need my salary as much as anybody else, surely. Particularly now. But I'd be inclined to chin him. I'll be perfectly honest. If he'd asked me to do that. Again, he's not stupid. And for those that don't know, this particular centre is directly opposite the Spitfire Museum down in Kent. Which is a tribute to all of those people that fought against Nazism in the Battle of Britain. You know, it's Manston is part of Hellfire Corner. He's not ignorant of that, and ultimately, it's ironic. I've been reading a book recently about children of the Nazis, and Rudolf Hess was a doting father that lived at Auschwitz-Birkenau with his wife and children, and they had an idyllic childhood next to what was going on in Auschwitz. Robert Jenrick doesn't care. He's a monster, like the rest of the party, frankly. Anybody that defends this or stands by idly
I'm not
is a
seeing anybody defend it, remarkably. I mean, I haven't been paying attention to Idiot's Corner this morning.
I think silence is a form of defence in this instance. I don't think support for your party means that you should be able to stand by idly and not stand against this sort of behaviour.
They should be up in arms, shouldn't they? I mean, everybody should be. Even people who can remain passionately opposed to current immigration levels should have no problem at all saying, this isn't what we do, this isn't who we are, this isn't right. I think you could support the Rwandan deportation scheme more easily than this. You could support that and still condemn this. I think you'd be morally bankrupt to a lesser degree, but still there.
And Robert Jenrick has form on this, doesn't he? I mean, he doesn't exactly have an unblemished record when it comes to things like the Holocaust Memorial. And
I don't know. I don't know about that, but I do know his in-laws fled the Holocaust. So be careful. I don't know what you're referring to there. Sorry.
It's definitely worth a look. 2020, 2019. But again, thoroughly indefensible, and the fact that I have to live so close to this. It's a sense of great shame. I wish there was something that I could do to stop this, but clearly,
no. You know, that is it. I'd remain a little uncomfortable with giving a coating to the staff that work there, but I completely understand where you're coming from. It reads to me as if they spent quite a long time resisting it. As far as I can tell, the order was given in April when he visited. It is now, as you know, July. And it was only on Tuesday that the story came out. Now, it was also on Tuesday that the painting was done. So it would seem to me that perhaps they hoped it would. I mean, goodness me, could you imagine if he had followed it up? Tristram, get on to that asylum centre, will you? In Kent, the one near where James lives. You know, just down the road. Just make sure they've painted over that picture of Baloo the bear, will you? Could you imagine if he'd followed it up? I mean, you wonder how it would have happened if he didn't follow it up, but you'd be worried about him coming back, wouldn't you? Because he presumably, as an immigration minister, sits somewhere far above you in the food chain. He turns up in a couple of months and says, "Where's that? Why is that picture still there? I ordered that to be taken down. You better go and speak to HR." I don't know. But imagine that. Imagine if he followed it up. We need to check that picture of Baloo the bear has been painted over at that asylum centre for traumatised children in Kent that we visited in April. Can't see it. Can't see a defence either. There was one earlier, actually, something about they're not really children, they're all adults. But then you heard Aida, who was 13 when she got here. So if you were capable of feeling shame, you'd be drowning in it, you despicable... 10:56 is the time. I'll swear one day, and Keith will notice because he's like a coiled spring with his finger poised above the dump button when he's not eating bananas. Nick's in Notting Hill. Let's try again. Nick, what would you like to say?
Yeah, g'day, mate. Sorry about that. I've been confined to the kitchen for better reception.
That's better. Nice one. Where were we?
Yeah, I was just saying that he's not only done an awful thing, but he's done the opposite of the thing that you would hope someone in his position would do.
Yes.
Now, if you walked into a centre with blank walls that was specifically for children, you'd say,
let's
for
get
God's
some nice
sake.
cheery pictures up. God, you're right, aren't you?
These kids have been through hell. Can we not do something?
I don't think they should be here. I wish we were doing more to keep them out or to process them differently. But when they're here, they're here. Let's put some nice. You don't. What I'm saying is, you don't have to be, Saint Francis of Assisi about it. But you could.
Yeah, I mean,
just that impulse, that initial impulse response.
It's the levels of magnitude are obscene to how far past
normal.
What is
normal.
Just
That's why I don't get it. It's an it's an unsatisfying phony.
You're not a narcissistic sociopath.
It must be something.
Slightly narcissistic, but not a sociopath.
Yeah, explain it.
Like it's all.
You can't do
it. It. No, because you must lack all empathy. You clearly can't identify with anybody apart from yourself. And of course, these are others. It's another form of othering. And to explain it to his children, well, probably do it the same way, that the Nazi youth had things explained to them. It says they're not like us.
I think when there is a vacuum, then anything can move into it. And you're the first attempt at trying to imagine how you'd explain it to your own children, or more pertinently, how he would explain it to his. And there is a great difficulty for me to push back on that. How would you begin to? Well, don't worry, they're not like it. It couldn't happen to you. Don't worry, they're not. They shouldn't be here. They're not like you. But then you look at the family history from the other side of their parenting, and you wonder, good grief, what a morning. It's very unsatisfying work, this. Even when we're dealing with stuff that we find pretty grim or even disgusting, there's always a sense of moving towards the light together. I hope I'm not being pompous or over-egging the pudding of this particular programme, but Nick nailed it there with that sort of narcissistic, sociopathic, that sense that there are some lights. These are some lights that never go out, but that would be a complete misrepresentation of both what I'm trying to describe and the Smiths. But there is no light. Or the light at the end of the tunnel is actually an express train coming towards you. Normally after an hour together, we've moved to at least closer towards an understanding of something that we began discussing because we found it so repellent or outrageous or disgusting. I am as baffled, as disgusted as I was at the very beginning. And he's a minister of the Crown. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. I think we'll run with, was it Terry's suggestion there of Conservative voters and not, I voted for Boris Johnson to be Mayor of London in 2008. I don't get to throw any stones. Let he who is without sin cast the first vote. But if you do see yourself as much more allied with that sort of ideology, that sort of politics than not, I'd love to hear you talk about this. I'd love to hear your take on this, because this isn't your fault. This isn't your doing. This isn't your party, I don't think. What's happened today? An immigration minister has ordered that some murals get painted over because it's too welcoming. So rather than asking what's wrong with him, I want to look at the politics of it, ideally with the help of people more sympathetic perhaps to the Conservative position than many of the callers we heard from in the first hour. But what's he up to? What's he doing? Given that the publicity was not supposed to come out. You remember when Suella Braverman was ticked off by a Holocaust survivor, Joan Salter. I'm not showing off. I've been writing about her. That's why I can remember her name. I may have struggled to do so otherwise. When she was ticked off by a Holocaust survivor who asked her to stop using language that reminded her of what the environment was like when she fled the Holocaust. And Suella Braverman essentially doubled down on her rhetoric. Jenrick came out and said that it was important to listen to her. And he said that politicians must choose their words carefully. So in public, he risked the wrath of Suella Braverman by suggesting that the Holocaust survivor who asked her to stop talking in ways that reminded her of the Nazis, had a point. So he did that in public, and yet in private, it would appear, he calls for the cartoons to be painted over because the asylum centre is too welcoming. What? Just have a crack at the politics. Or is it politics? So we've failed on the psychology. All we've got on the psychology is that the man's devoid of conscience, devoid of decency. I'm not one of those people who says typical Tory at this point, although I understand why you might be. The reason why I'm not one of those people who says typical Tory at this point is because I know there are lots of Tories listening to this programme, people who identify as Tory who will be just as disgusted as you are, or as I am. But if the psychology eludes us, what's the politics? It's the most remarkable thing. Sometimes, you could probably tell at the end of the last hour, I was thinking of winding it down. I was thinking about it during the break, talking about it during the break with colleagues. You're just sort of like, no, this isn't a normal topic. This isn't a normal story. You know, I have my little lists in the morning. I don't even do lists anymore. I get my scissors. I've told you this. You know this. I get my scissors, real scissors. I cut stories out of the newspapers. Sometimes young people come in to do a shift here or to work. They just look at me as if I'm Methuselah. They look at me as if I'm old Father Time. He's sitting there all flipping left and swiping right and chopping this and pasting that. I'm sitting there with bloody scissors, cutting stories out of the newspapers like it's 1973. And that's what I do. I cut stories out of the papers, and then we get to the top of the hour. And I've actually, if you're interested, a few years ago I stopped looking at whether or not the phones were ringing or the switchboard was full. I just took a view. Are we still interested in this? Is it still biting? And then I shuffled through the other stories that we've got. COVID quitters are in poverty and need help to find work. COVID inquiry wins right to read Johnson's text. Twitter may sue over rival threads. And looking, what else are we going to talk about? Why class is back on the agenda. I definitely want to do that today because we ran out of time yesterday. And this isn't like that, is it? This isn't another topic that we talk about together, or another story, or another contender for inclusion on the big show. It's not like that. It doesn't feel like that. It starts off like that. And what's it like for you at your end of the microphone? I don't know. Because it starts off like, what's James going to talk about today? What are we going to talk about today? What are we going to talk about today? And then it begins to morph slightly because you're banging your head. You're not getting the little chinks of light. Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. It could have been this and it could have been that. Oh, maybe there is a precedent. But actually you get to the end of the hour and you're more outraged, more upset, more baffled by what we've become. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. Quincy is in Tunbridge Wells. Quincy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I think it's correct to say that this is a type of. It wasn't meant to come out. It wasn't meant to be public sphere, really. I think this is operational form or modus operandi, if you want. I think that this was directed at the staff at the centre itself. Yeah. I think Jenrick wants to send the message. He wanted to make sure the message was loud and clear. It's not just Suella, it's all of us. All Home Office ministers, we've all got a particular type of nastiness that we intend to peddle, and you're going to have to toe the line, And if you ask, well, why such a petty, why such a small effort? Well, because it's the brick in the wall effect. It's one brick at a time that they're putting up this wall, and
there is no welcome here.
There is no welcome here.
Spread the word.
By brick that this wall goes up. James, when you leave LBC on a Friday, you're looking forward to spending time on the weekend with your wife and daughters. A lot of people in the Home Office, and some who've been knighted, leave the Home Office and go home on the weekend and try to figure out new ways to show their bosses how to be more nasty. They've been giving a portfolio. Go home and come back and figure out a way how to make a rule like Rule 3C, for example, invalid. Rule 3C says that, Ms. May actually changed it because it used to give an immigrant with an application that had failed 28 days in between the failed and returned application and a new one, and making a new one to remain validly in the UK. Right. She changed that to 14 days. Okay. She changed that to 14 days with a really innocuous reason as to why she did it. But a Home Office...
So what would they call it? A hostile environment?
part of the hostile environment, C3 changed the 28-day period to 14 days. And somebody went home and actually came up with that. And they decided to make the difference between two words, whether an application had been refused or whether an application had been rejected. Right. Depending on which one of those two, it depends on whether or not you are protected as an immigrant applicant by Rule 3C. And they can use that. If your application is rejected, then you can benefit from 3C. If it's refused, you cannot benefit from 3C.
So they change the semantics.
And therefore,
to be crueler, to be more hostile,
It's really dangerous because while Mrs. May's husband had vested interest in the detention of immigrants at G4S and Securico, they were making people illegally present in the UK, making them into overstayers by virtue of Rule 3C. So if your application was rejected, you were protected. If your application was refused, you were not protected. And the 8 days that it took between you failing your application and getting to a lawyer and making a new application, they then said that you were illegally in the UK, you were an overstayer, and therefore you became.
So it's an abandonment of due process in pursuit of hostility. Yes. I mean, I can't argue with you, Quincy. I can't, even if I wanted to. The motivation for this is. I mean, emotional, if that's the right word to use, but ideological. We don't really want anyone. Seems to be where it's coming from. I hear from people like that. I get messages from people like that. You see them on social media. Don't want anyone coming here. Children, adults, doesn't matter. Men, women, doesn't matter. We'll talk about fighting age men because it's a little bit more emotive. Don't talk about working age men in a country with epic vacancies across all sectors. But no, we don't really want any. So create an atmosphere. Let them know, especially the people working in the centre, like the one that Aida was taken into after fleeing Bosnia at the age of 13, and first warmth she'd felt, the first support, kindness she'd felt since leaving her home was in one of these centres, and Jenrick wants to get rid of that kindness. Thank you, Quincy. Timothy's in Harrogate. Timothy, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Morning. I was very touched indeed when I heard Aida speaking about her arrival in this country, because I was the minister responsible for the Bosnian resettlement scheme on behalf of the UK government.
Gosh.
And I mean, that really touched me, because it's very difficult to know, when we did that scheme, and that was a United Nations settlement scheme,
right?
In which I think this country could be very proud of it. And part of the whole process was the people, the officials, and all the others involved in the resettlement trying their very best to provide homely conditions, to give a really warm sort of welcome and help to those people that we'd agreed to take in from Bosnia. And we had some sort of, you had statistical evidence, but it's the first time today that I've actually heard someone say that this is something that was so important in their future lives.
Oh, wow.
So as I was the minister who's responsible, and admittedly, and James, I know what you're saying this morning, I was a Conservative minister, please.
Yes.
So, I just want to make it fairly clear that certainly from my point of view, I just like to hear something like that said by someone.
No, that surprises me, that you wouldn't have, because you get the paperwork across your desk and you're as you say, you're familiar with the statistics, but to hear the voice of a then 13-year-old girl who benefited from the welcome that you helped to enact as a
I know,
as a minister.
I'm not taking credit for this, because of course all the officials and the United Nations people themselves and all that, everybody involved in that whole scheme, a lot of the community were warmly welcoming too. And I mean, I was just, if you like, the pen pusher. I was just the minister at the back of it all who had the responsibility. But I just say this is very, very touching. And when you're talking in the context that you are this morning about what I think is an unfortunate situation and something which I don't like the sound of, I just want to put it on the record with you. And I have spoken to you previously,
Yes.
And I don't want to come across as some sort of dripping lefty type of.
Nothing wrong.
I'm a Conservative.
There's nothing wrong with dripping lefties, Lord Kirkhope, as I have calculated you are also known as.
I just want to say that, and I just want to make it clear that one of the problems we have, I'll just be very brief, because one of the problems we have, we've got the migrants bill going through the Lords at the moment,
yes.
And I must admit, I have been partly responsible for one or two comments and changes that I've been trying to get into it, because I don't like some of it. But the issue is that what the government has said it would do, and I really want the evidence now, is that it's going to have to set up more legal and safe routes for people to apply to come here, so that we don't get a situation where everybody who comes here is regarded as illegal.
Of course.
Whatever their motives may be, whatever their situation, we want to provide proper legal routes for them to be able to apply to come here, apply for asylum when they have real pressures in their lives that entitle them.
Like you did in 1996.
Well, we had it until 2011. We could apply through our embassies and consulates all around the world, and I want them to go back to that. But of course, my colleagues and I who are trying to push these points aren't getting very far on at the moment, because the House of Commons seems to have a very fixed view about this legislation. And I think it's a shame, because we have a reputation, we have a background we can be proud of, even if it is a little while ago.
Sure.
And I just want it restored again, James.
I'm very grateful for your call. You will understand I need to push you slightly back towards the topic under discussion, because you use the word unfortunate, which is fairly mild. To be absolutely clear, an immigration minister has ordered the removal of murals which depicted characters such as Baloo from the Jungle Book and Mickey Mouse because they were thought to be too welcoming.
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be very helpful to you. All I could say is I don't think I would do it myself that way. And I don't really... It seems to be rather contrary to what I believe is probably the sort of historic friendliness and openness of our society and our country.
Yes, and I will remind listeners, in case they weren't paying attention, that you were a Conservative minister, a Conservative politician, when you were contributing to the processes under discussion, and indeed to the kind of country that we were until, by your own account, until 2011. Timothy, now Lord Kirkhope, thank you. 11:16 is the time. 19 minutes after 11 is the time. A couple of people pointing out that the only Conservative politicians who appear on this programme ring in as callers, and they are usually not to be found in the current parliamentary ranks. But I salute Timothy Kirkhope for doing that. I think Aida should be delighted that her story managed to reach the ears of one of the politicians responsible for the welcome that she received when she fled Bosnia and arrived as a 13-year-old in precisely the sort of processing centre from which Robert Jenrick has recently ordered the removal of murals depicting cartoon characters on the grounds that they were thought to be too welcoming. We'll take this up to 11:30, and then we'll move on to less bleak or disturbing territory, I think. And we'll just go there with what? I mean, explain it to me. Forget about Robert Jenrick's children. Explain to me why he's done what he's done. I thought that Timothy did a good job, actually. The depiction of what was there before and the importance of it. So why would someone turn up in that sort of context and have a crack at making it less welcoming, less warm? Leslie's in Mill Hill. Leslie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I was just thinking that for me, I don't think it's about the optics of this.
No,
I think it's more that he really genuinely doesn't see these children as the same as him or his children. I think he feels that they're foreign children, damaged children that are eventually going to grow up to be, a drain on the system, cause trouble. And I think that their idea of, I think they think, we need to be tough. We need to be tough on these children because, if we're tough on them, they'll, they won't grow up to be a, sponge on the system, and they'll know that it's got to be hard. And rather than, we might get one or two that will sort of pull themselves up by the bootstraps and become something really great, and then we can say, like
the parents of the Conservative politicians who are competing to be the most vile about immigration in general at the moment. They're always, they do seem to regularly come. Dominic Raab's father was a refugee. We know that Priti Patel and Suella Braverman's parents both came here from overseas, and we know that Robert Jenrick's in-laws well, I think they were. People keep telling me they were. And that actually makes sense under your analysis, doesn't it? Because when he gave Suella Braverman a ticking off of sorts, telling her to choose her words carefully after a Holocaust survivor criticised her language on immigration, perhaps he was capable of empathy because he could see people that he felt a kinship with, being on the receiving end of that sort of language.
And I think it's like then when they realise, like he realises he's gone too far, like, oh, this doesn't look very good. It's like, oh, the public aren't there yet. Like, they're not ready for that yet. You know, I've gone a bit too
that's
soon
scary.
with it.
Yes.
I feel that it's that.
So give it a year, and he'd be wanting it out there, publicity-wise.
Yeah. If it would have gone, if the public would have been all for it, I don't think he would have had a blinked about it. I really don't. I just think it's the fact that they've kind of gone, oh no, and then they're like, okay, well, backpedal, because we're not quite at that point where, you know, they're really. But again, obviously, hopefully, please God, we never are.
No, well, I mean, it's even more remarkable in a way on a personal level. It was only in January of this year that he said there is a significant difference between those people who come to the UK through genuine persecution and human rights abuses around the world, which there are many, and those people who come gaming the system for economic reasons. And then fast forward 6 months, and he's taking down murals, ordering that murals of Baloo the bear get taken down because unaccompanied child asylum seekers may be committing the cardinal sin of feeling a little bit briefly warm and welcome. It's just a bizarre story, isn't it? I thank you, Leslie. I thank you for that. No, that reminder as well of. You can have empathy for some people, but not for others. I guess the Ukrainian refugee scheme showed us that in a way. Oh, yes, we did ourselves proud on that, but not so proud on people coming from Syria or Afghanistan or other parts of the world. 24 after 11 is the time. Ross is in Merton. Ross, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James.
Hello,
great show, yeah.
Thank you.
A couple of points I've got, actually.
Go on.
The first one is the complete irony and hypocrisy of this thing about them removing the mural from the immigration centre. I was a prison officer for 12 years, and within that system, we were encouraged as staff to encourage prisoners to use paintings and things to make it a more not enjoyable isn't the right word, but
humane.
You know, exactly right.
Yeah.
And you know, things like visit centres where children go and visit their parents. There was toys in there. There was all sorts of things, activities for them, and you know, it's nonsensical. And it's sort of the other point I wanted to make was that people seem to be sort of not yourself, but it seems to be a general thing about why the Conservatives are taking this stance with immigration. I've got a theory on that.
Go on.
When Brexit first happened, you know, Will Self, the
of course,
sort of satirist or whatever,
author.
He was on the television, and what he said to me was what he said on there was exactly right. I feel he said that not everybody that voted Brexit was racist, but every racist voted for Brexit.
Yes.
So now the Conservatives, they're a done deal. They know they're going to get walloped. So their last thing is to try and get the vote of the 52% that voted out. That's their last gambit. Which
is a miscalculation because, as Will Self and you and I have all said over the years, that 52% does not represent racism. It's within that.
Correct.
So they're just going after the 15 to 25% that might have flirted with UKIP once, or
because they're shot. They've got no, you know. Let's be honest about it. You know, they're not
looking
going to get
great.
In now.
It's not looking great. But never say never. Stranger things have happened. The ghost of Neil Kinnock looms over Keir Starmer at the moment, I think, very much. But they didn't. The bit I don't get, the final bit I don't get, and we've got another amazing caller up next, so I won't keep you unduly. But the bit I don't get, and you can't get it, I don't think he wanted it to come out.
No, but then I think that they can. The thing about these things is that they well know as well that he can say he doesn't want it to get out, but there's going to be staff there that sort of, if you like, whistle blow.
Maybe.
And you know, I'm not a great believer in this where staff sort of are scared for their job if they didn't do it. You know, when I've worked in
prisons,
you know, jails and that, you know, you sort of, if you didn't agree with something, you took it high, you took it to the governor and said, look, I don't agree with that, governor. You know, like what's going on?
Well, that's why I think the fact the order came out in April and the murals were only painted over on Tuesday suggests to me that there has been toing and froing, and suggests, I have no proof of this except trying to work with the evidence in front of us, that the Home Office would have been on the phone to them and making sure it had happened. Otherwise, you'd just sort of think, just tell him we've done it. Wouldn't you, Ross? You say, tell him we've done it. He's not coming back for another 18 months. We'd probably have known this lot. Someone else will be in power by then, or the whole place would have shut down. Thank you, mate. Guy's in Chichester. Guy, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi. I'm the cartoonist who you mentioned earlier, who I offered my help and of the help of many other professional cartoonists. And he, so...
Have you had any comeback? What have you done? Because I know you've had a lot of your colleagues, your cartoonist colleagues have already said, yeah, count me in.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had feedback. I mean, I've had offers of help, thousands of offers of cups of tea and lemon meringue pie and things like that from locals in Dover.
Okay.
There's red tape involved in the actual us going into a children's centre in the first place.
Of course.
But also, as you mentioned earlier, I mean, it started off as a no-go, really, because, of course, they're in charge of,
Well, that's what I thought.
Jenrick's obviously in charge of the whole thing. And it would be, politically sort of tinder fire if we went in and just went over it. But what they have said is, could we keep in touch with them and do some work for them just to help children understand English and, sometimes using cue cards and things like that and all sorts of stuff like that. So something good has come out of it in the end, but possibly not what we were hoping for in the first place.
No,
also, and there's a little bit of, it's added people, it's given a little bit of hope to people at least.
Yes.
That, not everyone's awful.
Why this one? Why was this the story, Guy, that made you sort of think, this isn't, I'm not going to draw my way out of this one, I'm going to do something else?
Well, no, I mean, we were, the whole, as soon as I saw it and realised what Jenrick had done, I just was so appalled by what he'd done, and also the fact that it was cartoons. I knew that we could fix it. I hadn't really thought it through, obviously, but I had such a positive response from all the other guys in the PCO, in the Professional Cartoonist Organisation, and they pitched in. But the trouble is, Jenrick obviously, he has great scoops of his soul missing, so
that's
there's not much you can do about that.
I look forward to seeing your next depiction of him.
Well, I do the daily cartoon of the Metro, so I'm sure this. I'll be able to swirl this into a cartoon
thank you,
about myself.
Well, yes, exactly. Two callers there from if you like, the heart of the story in different ways. Because Guy was the first person we mentioned, and giving us a reminder that most of us are all right. I think we probably need to start reminding ourselves of that a bit more often. Spend so long pointing out how bloody awful some of them are, the Jenricks and the Bravermans and the Johnsons and the rest of them. But goodness me, most of us are all right, aren't we? Aren't we? Aren't we? Thomas Watts has got the headlines. It is 11:33. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Do you know it's 18 years to the day since I came on air at 10 o'clock and we thought there'd been some sort of power outage on the London Underground. Nick did the last about 20 minutes, was it, before the end of Nick's show, that reports started coming in that something out of the ordinary had happened on the London Underground, and then while we were on air, more and more details began to filter through, and it quickly became pretty clear that we were in the midst of a serious terror attack, and we stayed on air throughout. I hadn't been doing the job very long, but which is probably why it doesn't sit as far. I was just trying to get through it, but goodness me. 52, of course, dead, hundreds hurt as those terrorist bombs hit London. I like the all on the board. You've seen that thing. Sometimes they just get it right, people who write the messages. And, of course, this was a London transport tragedy. It was family for them, and they got it right again. Today we remember the 52 people who were killed in the London bombings on the 7th of July 2005. They will never be forgotten. Forever in our hearts and minds they will stay. Today we remember the people who were injured and those who suffered, the heroes who helped, and the people who lost their loved ones. We will never forget that terrible day. Crikey, so many stories, so many memories jostling for position. It is now 11:35. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you weren't around at the time or you weren't living here, it is one of those occasions where Twitter comes into its own. The hashtag London bombings will really give you an idea and a sense of what was going on, what it was like. It was one of the most horrible mornings of my life, I think, trying to keep a handle on all of that as it emerged, as the hope that it would be an accident as opposed to a human endeavour, and that there wouldn't be the hope that there wouldn't be casualties, or that it was everything, every little hope, every scintilla of hope disappeared in the course of the time that we spent together that morning. It is 25 to 12, as I say. I'm going to change pace completely now. I'm keeping an eye on that Jenrick story. I don't know whether that story will wither away. It was nice to speak to the cartoonist, who is going to do his best to keep the story alive. But as he said, as Guy Venables said, the likelihood of being able to get into the centre while Jenrick is still in charge is pretty slim. So I don't know. If you lived in a normal country where there was, 30 or 40% of the media was outraged by this, instead of about 5 to 10% of it. I've only seen it reported in one newspaper. I don't know whether it's been picked up elsewhere. But if you lived in a normal country, then something would happen. Jenrick would buckle, backtrack. The cartoons would go back up. Guy Venables and his colleagues would be invited into the centre to redecorate the walls, and you would just sort of grab some hope and positivity from the embers of the horror and despair. But we don't live in a normal country. We haven't for a very long time, actually. It's why Terry referred back to that post-Brexit contribution to public discourse of Will Self, and what we allowed into the mainstream, what we allowed into the town square. So you don't, and that's why I don't know whether or not this story will have another chapter, whether it will have a postscript, or whether it will just continue to be the case that one of the bleakest, most unhappy buildings in the country has been successfully rendered even bleaker and more unhappy by Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick. 11:37 is the time. So you'll understand why I want to move on. I'm going to go back to something that I talked about yesterday, and then quite rightly you completely ignored me, because the interesting conversation yesterday was about Oracy. I noticed that the current Education Secretary has failed completely to understand what Keir Starmer was talking about yesterday, which I suppose is significant in and of itself. She tweeted something about mocking the idea of speaking lessons, and of course what he was talking about wasn't speaking lessons. Here you go, listen to this. Keir Starmer thinks that the education system's number one priority should be speaking lessons. This is borderline insulting. Kids like me who grew up in Knowsley know what education under Labour means. They have failed children time and time again and continue to do so in Wales. So I checked this. Gillian Keegan was 11 in 1979 when Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister. So I don't know what she's talking about. I suppose she could be talking about her primary schooling. But the idea that her most formative years, the most crucial parts of her education, where examinations occurred, were somehow awful and enable her to know what education under Labour means, it means she'd made her mind up by the time she was 11. That just seems unlikely. Maybe she wasn't very good at maths. Maybe the idea of being born in 1965, would it? No, I don't do that. I haven't got it in my head. So if she was 11 in 1979, then she was born in 1968. You sure? Yeah. 1968. There we go. Well done, everybody. So a strange contribution. But, of course, he wasn't talking about speaking lessons. He was talking about much more than that. Confidence, facility, verbal facility, the idea of having a bigger vocabulary, a better ability to articulate your own feelings so you don't end up enraged by your inability to do so. The other element of the conversation that we didn't follow through on yesterday is the class element of it. And I, as you know, this is, of all the subjects we talk about together that are soft, if you like, this is my favourite, or it's certainly up there with my favourite. Whether we're having a conversation about accents and voices, what are we talking about? Are we talking about keys? I think we're talking about keys and doors, aren't we? And invisible doors or glass doors that you don't know are there until you run into them at full speed. I find it fascinating because my life is a study in the British class system. I was brought up by parents from Yorkshire with Yorkshire accents, something that would get picked up on by other boys when I was at my posh public school. It would be a ground for attempted teasing if your parents had a Yorkshire accent. And then there's the financial side of it as well. I told you yesterday about one of my first outings as a Fleet Street gossip columnist when my colleagues thought it was hilarious that I banked with the Halifax and they all banked with Coots & Co, like what Nigel Farage used to do, or Flemings or Bearings. And I had no idea people would find that funny even after going to Ampleforth for 5 years. They bank at the Halifax. That's not... Most lads at school had normal bank accounts. There were a few whose parents had, given them access to a few with trust funds, but most kids had normal bank accounts from the Abbey National or Lloyd's or the Halifax. I was sitting at a table with 4 or 5 other people who've all got bank cards from banks I'd never heard of because they're not on the high street. There's sort of banks that have only got one branch. You pop into some square in Belgravia and have a chat about the returns on your trust fund and how much you're going to get when you're 21. Utter foreign country to me. Completely foreign country. So it's about codes, isn't it? It's about keys. It's about doors. And I've seen it from both ends. I think that's why I find it so fascinating. And then there's a really freaky psychological addition to my own experiences. So I'd get ribbed at school for being common. And then when I came back to Kidderminster in the holidays, I'd get ribbed for being posh. So I was a toff in Kidderminster and a pleb at public school. And when you're young, this stuff can bother you a bit. It's always better not to let it bother you too much, but it turns you into quite a confused character. So when I started in journalism, I had about probably 8 degrees of accent. I've told you this before. In fact, when I started here, you could tell sometimes. My accent would shift slightly according to who I was talking to. I think it still does, but it goes in the other direction now. So if you rang me with quite a salt-of-the-earth accent, I might start sounding a little bit more estuarine. I might have started sort of dropping a couple of consonants at the end of I think I've got a terrible feeling I still do it the other way. I think I crank it up a couple of gears when I'm talking to someone posh. I hope not, but I think I might do. So Jack Whitehall's very posh, utterly comfortable in his own skin, which is enviable, isn't it? But he talked about this, actually, on Full Disclosure. When he started out, he tried to sound like a Cockney and suddenly realised how ridiculous he was sounding. Also, that level of comedy genius needs authenticity. You've got to be authentic to connect with the audience. But I can't remember who he was comparing himself. I normally use Grant Mitchell. Did he do Grant? So he'd say he did a gig above a pub in London somewhere and he realised halfway through that he was sounding utterly inauthentic. So I used to do that. We all did. Guy Ritchie was I think did he invent Mockney? The idea that you went to his mother was the chair of the Kensington and Chelsea Conservatives, but when Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels came out, Guy Ritchie sounded like the Lost Mitchell brother. So that weird kind of, what is it? Almost a chameleon-like consciousness. I don't know what it is. So that's part of it. And then, of course, because I'm adopted, so I've always got a consciousness of the me that wasn't adopted. This is part of the reason why I find it so fascinating. I'm like, what would you be? Who would you be if you had been raised by different parents? Most people don't go through that. You might imagine it in a very vague sense, but unless you're actually adopted, the reality of the possibility of being raised by different parents is well, for me at least, it's much more present. Or it was much more present in my mind subconsciously. It was only when I started writing my last book, I really realised that there's that other me. There's that person who didn't get the advantages and the privileges that I've got, that I've had. And look, compared to people like George Osborne or Jacob Rees-Mogg, I didn't get that much. But compared to the massive majority of the country, I got shed loads of advantage and privilege. But what if I didn't get any of it? Would I be here today? Would I be doing this? Would I be married to my wife? Would I be in a job that I love? Would I be working on another book? I don't think I would. I don't know what I'd be doing, but I don't think I would. And I don't, that's part of me that doesn't like saying that, because you like to think that you got here through effort and merit and hard work. And there has been effort and hard work and merit. But goodness me, the head start. The head start. That's all you got to admit, is the head start. So that's why I'm so interested in it. Code switching, it's called, isn't it? I guess in a more modern parlance. But what we don't want to get all highfalutin about it. I just want to know when you've run into the glass wall. Seriously, like your bank card moment, when you realised that there was a class structure in your life, not just in your country, and you ran into it. I'm talking about being judged by what we would loosely describe as snobs. You might be a snob in other contexts. You might judge other people, but it's that moment of surprise. So another time at school, this isn't a very good example, but I didn't know how to pronounce anchovy. I'd never seen an anchovy before. You ever seen an anchovy before when you were young? Did you have anchovies? We never had anchovies in Kidderminster. Hey, are we lucky if you got a sardine? So I presumed, when I saw it on a tin, I presumed it was pronounced like anchor, like an anchovy. And that boys are awful, boarding school boys in particular, because you've got the kind of law of the jungle plus the snobbery. So little things like that coming up against. And you think I'm exaggerating? They do it on purpose. How do you think you spell Chumley Warner? If your name is Chumley Warner, how do you think you spell it? Have you ever been to Beauchamp Square in London? Have you ever been to Beauchamp Square? Go on, spell it for me. That's not a coincidence. They pronounce it Beauchamp and spell it Beauchamp so that they can spot the plebs from 100 yards away. And that's just a couple of examples. Chumley Warner, I think, is spelled Cholmondeley. What Cholmondeley? And the Holmes and the so it's old school. It's there, isn't it? 11:46 is the time. So it's back on the agenda, is how it's written by one columnist today, Paul Wall in the Eye. Got the whole show from the Eye today. Why class is back on the agenda. And in some ways, my question is about why should it be? Why it should be back on the agenda. So when did you come across class judgment to your own surprise? 03456060973. Still got snobbery. Can we come up with some stories when you found yourself being judged in a way that is grossly and outrageously unfair, but because of the nature of the society in which we live, you came out of it feeling shame and embarrassment, when in a normal country, the shame and embarrassment should have been entirely on the person doing the judging. Go on, I know you've got a story. I can't wait to hear it. 03456060973 is the number that you need. Because a lot of people don't believe it. And you've got such a weird mixture. You've got the deference, the forelock tugging, the cap doffing, you know your place. It's not for the likes of us. God made us high and lowly and ordered our estate. Then you've got posh people who probably don't even realise they're doing it. The biggest snobs are the social climbers, in my experience. My friends who were born really to the manner born, they are not the ones who are desperately trying to make other people feel uncomfortable or unwelcome. Genuinely, I do know a little bit about that. The ones who are desperately trying to do it are the ones who've changed their own names from, like, I don't know, Ian Smith to Ian Duncan Smith, for example, or Jake Mogg to Jacob Rees-Mogg. The ones who are desperately trying to prove how posh they are usually the ones who are desperate to put down other people in the hope of shoring up their own wafer-thin self-esteem. But it doesn't stop it being embarrassing when you're on the receiving end of it. Is it wearing the wrong clothes? They're all deliberately put there. Using the wrong cutlery? That doesn't really work anymore. It did when I was young. People would genuinely not know. I'm still not quite sure how to eat an artichoke. But just the things that prove that class still matters to some people. 03456060973 is the number you need. It's 11:49. It is 11:52. You're listening to James O'Brien. I should give awards for my most devoted listeners. I wonder how many people will get this from Corpsey. He goes, "We know exactly where you'd be without your schooling, James. In the corner of a pub, showing off the scars gained during your time as an apprentice sea lion trainer." One day I'll make a list of all. I've got probably, about 17 anecdotes that somehow I've been managing to recycle and recirculate for the best part of 20 years. The sea lion trainer one is true. That's the one that people don't think is true, but it actually is true. But I don't know. Maybe I need some new ones. I should get out more. 11:52 is the time. Class and the proof that it still matters. It still exists. Starmer's speech yesterday was designed to do a number of things, but key among his motivations is what Michael Gove oddly called the soft bigotry of low expectations. The idea that some people need to stay in their lane, need to know their place. And the way that impacts upon us is not just about education and aspiration, it's also about integration and the way other people behave towards us. That's usually when you realise that there are glass walls in our lives or glass ceilings in our society when you run into it. So just tell me about the time you did. Kate's in Tulsa. Kate, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning.
Hello.
Good afternoon, actually. I just wanted to say that many years ago, when I was very small, my parents moved from the East End of London down to the depths of the Somerset countryside.
Okay.
And I went to school, and they said that within 2 weeks, my accent changed. It went from East End to...
How old were you?
I was when I went to school, I was about 5. When I went to Somerset, I think I was about 4. But
so it was only when... So you just tried to speak like the other people in your class?
Well, I got beaten up regularly.
Did you?
So
At the age of 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I changed my accent quite quickly, but the bonus is that it's given me a lifelong facility with languages. I can pick up languages quite easily. But and you might, on the subject of class, you might imagine that this countryside is classless. It isn't. It is still class ridden.
No, I wouldn't think it was classless at all. But is it a different type of class? I mean,
I think so. Yes. The farmers and the landowners are top of. I don't know whether it's quite the same now, but in those days it was church landowners and then the farm owners.
No, it's worse in the countryside because so many swathes of it are owned by aristocrats. It doesn't matter where. I mean, it matters slightly where you are. So I know Norfolk very well, and it's astonishing how much of Norfolk is still owned by grandees, like whole villages. And so that I mean, that's not even class, is it? That's feudal. That's different. That's not. And you might think that the lord of the manor is your mate because he gives you a wave when he's going past in his Land Rover surveying all of his lands. But what struck me when we spent a lot of time there was the old school deference of some of the older people living in a village who genuinely thought that the lord was the local aristocrat was like a source of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a source of bounty almost. Like someone, do you know what I mean? Someone to whom they owed fealty.
Well, it dates back a very long time, but certainly from the 19th century, when the lord of the manor was seen as the giver of bounty.
And without their patronage and their support, you'd be sleeping in the street and living off acorns. Yes, further than the 19th century, I'd take it all the way back to the Doomsday Book. Thank you. So if in a different world, Kate, you're back in London now, but in a different world, you'd have sounded like Barbara Windsor at this stage in your life.
Absolutely, yep.
Did your parents keep their old accents?
Yes.
So you'd come home and they'd be...
That's right. I'd be talking like that and talking about croupy down and down round and...
Your poor parents had no idea what was going on. Thank you. Oliver's on the Wirral. Oliver, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hello. Well, you asked when did I first experience class?
Yes.
And I've got a real answer. I've got a very specific answer. It was when I went to university. So I went to a state college.
Right.
And then I went to a posh college at a posh university, CF Boris Johnson.
Yes.
And I had to go there a day early because my mum could give me a lift on the Sunday because, lo and behold, weirdly enough, she had to work on the Monday.
Gosh.
And so I got there on the Sunday and I got my room, did the bag. There was this thing called hall where I could get some supper. So, I mean, in this day and age, we'd think Hogwarts, but there I was. Here's some supper. And without saying a word, I was just there eating my supper.
Yeah.
And 2 or 3 boys really kindly came up to me and said, "Don't worry if people ask you what school you're from."
Right.
And I was like, "Do what?"
Yeah.
I mean, in retrospect, do I really look that common?
Oh, mate. So they could tell that you Well, I mean, it cuts both ways. They could tell that you hadn't been to a private school.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, what is it? I'd never heard of Ampleforth. I've never heard of half these schools.
It didn't take long if you were at Balliol, did it?
well, two of my very close friends at the time were from your school, probably in the year below you.
Gosh.
And I was just like, okay, this is different, because I'd never felt conscious of it.
You wouldn't
I'd never known that. It just wasn't an issue.
Someone wrote about, I don't know if you saw the article, it was really moving actually. I think they were just there for interview, and Johnson was around and started picking on them.
And he had a stammer or something.
I think that's what it was, and they started picking him on.
The mick out.
Yes, did you read it?
I read the piece. Yeah.
You had a happier experience.
Horrible.
You had a happier experience.
It was lovely. I mean, when I was there, I think there was another boy who'd been to a comprehensive school, and there might have been. There weren't very many girls there at the time. I think there was a girl who'd been to a comprehensive school.
Right.
So we were sort of trailblazing, and Lord loved them. The next.
You didn't talk like that, did you, when you were at school on the Wirral? I don't know. Did you?
I mean, to be absolutely honest, I might have had a bit of a telephone voice on for the first few months. But Lord loved them. I might have been a bit of a trailblazer.
Yes.
When I was in my third year doing English, it was just a 3-year course. A girl from my was admitted to do philosophy and physics, I think it was.
Yes.
This is quite funny as well, because we were in the bar, and obviously she was a humble fresher, and I was in the glorified heights of third year at this time. And all her friends assumed she must have been to a really posh school because she knew somebody in third year.
Oh wow! Well, so it breaks down, but it also enforces at the same time, doesn't it? It's a funny one.
It's there. And you
but you know that it would be the same for the others. The people who benefited, or the people who were at the other end of the telescope, they would probably not have been aware of how rarefied their existence was either. How odd it is not to say to someone, "What school did you go to?" You reply, and then you come up with 3 names or 4 connections, or you must know so and so, and suddenly you sort of create a network of social security around yourself.
That's it. I mean, it's. I think it's much. I don't know how it is now. I was in Oxford after 20 years just the other week to visit my tutor, and it's just changed beyond recognition. So I can't.
A lot more democratic.
Well, I think it was more the security that got me with gates and
keeping people in and keeping people out and all of that. Yes, I hear you. Well, there you go. You've got it. I mean, what we've done there, inevitably, perhaps, because I think it is probably the biggest gatekeeper of social division or snobbery or inequality or whatever you want to call it, is the education system, which is something else that Keir Starmer has addressed, although it wasn't in yesterday's speech, to make that cohort of people that can afford private education potentially even smaller than it is already. 12:01 is the time. David in Manchester. James, I have a mate who ran into a glass door. Literally, he knocked himself out for 20 minutes. It was hilarious. That's not quite what we're talking about. I don't know if that works on the radio either, but it made me chuckle. I've also got that problem that I've noticed popping up a little bit more often these days, which is it still true? So I tell you something that I'm fascinated by. It's based on my youth or my experiences a little earlier in life, and you wonder whether it is still true, but it certainly seems to be. I find the idea of mocking people for not knowing how to pronounce something, I don't know that my kids' generation would do that, or maybe they just knock about with nicer kids than I did, or than I was when I was in my teens. There's quite a lot of it about the way you say something, giving stuff away. There's some nice stories coming in. Let me have a look at this one. Holly says, it happens to me quite a lot, but purely because I'm from the north. One instance sticks out. When I visited a friend at York University, she introduced me and explained I was from Newcastle. A passerby asked me if Daddy worked down a mine and whether my toilet was indoors. The irony was that my family are millionaires and I went to private school, whereas he was from a rather average southern family with a mum who was a teacher and a dentist father. From Holly in Newcastle, possibly flipping the snobbery back in the direction of your critic there, Holly. I like this from Carly. I was judged in my 20s by my posh in-laws, having grown up in southeast London, because I didn't know what mayonnaise was. I'd only ever had salad cream and then yoghurt. I'd never heard of that either. That's an astonishing achievement, never having heard of yoghurt, unless I've misread your text. But I don't know that mayonnaise was a big thing growing up. It's an age thing, that, as well. But what intrigues me is the mocking of the not knowing. That I would have hoped had kind of gone out of fashion, as it were, but not necessarily. 7 minutes after 12 is the time. Louise is in Derby. Louise, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
We've talked before about the time when I was a teacher,
Yes.
and then I left the classroom, and then I work as a humanist wedding celebrant.
Indeed.
So I conduct and write and conduct humanist wedding ceremonies for people where I might be speaking for 30, 40 minutes at a time about the couple and getting them to say their vows to each other and things.
Yes.
So last year I did a wedding for a couple who had lots of London guests coming up to Derby for their wedding. And, you know, this is definitely not something that I don't think has been a barrier to me, but just this offhand comment kind of caught me off guard a little bit. So at the end of the ceremony, I was chatting with all the guests like I normally do, and they were all saying how amazing the ceremony had been, like they always do.
Of course they do.
But this guy said, really enjoyed it. It was really nice hearing somebody conduct a wedding ceremony who's got a proper working class accent. And at the time, I just kind of smiled and nodded and shrugged it off. But I got home and thought, like,
what does that mean?
Does he think I should be working down a pit?
It's a funny one, that, because there'll be people in your neck of the woods who do talk like him.
Yes. Yeah,
Won't
definitely.
There? People who grew up in your neck of the woods who do talk like him, but it's a loaded phrase, isn't it?
It's the assumption that because my accent is slightly northern, that means that equates to working class.
And he'd never been to a wedding ceremony where anybody had a regional accent, because it's a regional accent that you've got.
Absolutely.
It's not a class-based accent, unless you're really in the sort of in the clouds, and everyone you speak to, regardless of where they grew up in the country, sounds more or less the same.
But he made that link between my regional accent and working class, and it's something that I study linguistics at university, so I know quite a bit about dialect, and I've always been perfectly happy with the way that I speak. And you talked about code switching earlier on.
Yeah, do you ever do? I sense that's not something you've ever done.
I do it in kind of sociological terms, in terms of like, because it can apply to even if changing the way you speak to younger children, or things like that. But no, not in an accent way. But there's also something called convergence and divergence.
Go on.
So whether you adapt your accent to become more similar to the people around you, which would be convergence,
yes, or
divergence. And I've found myself in the past, if I'm around a lot of Southerners, I just become so much more Northern. And it's a bit like I'm trying to, I don't know, subconsciously distance myself from them a little bit sometimes.
Okay.
And be like,
yes. So I mean, tribal, a little bit tribal, possibly. Giving it that identifying yourself as being different from them.
Whereas a lot of people
do it the other way around.
Will converge.
Yeah,
yes,
I think I'm a converger. I'm a converger, or I have been over the years. It's I think I'd rather be a diverger, actually, looking back. Might have been. So that would have meant at school that I'd have gone full Kidderminster, which would have been interesting. I love that. I bet you are a brilliant celebrant. I bet. Have you got one this weekend? Have you got one tomorrow?
I have got one tomorrow. I'm very much looking forward to it. I'm going to add brilliant celebrant James O'Brien LBC onto my celebrant CV now.
You can't quite do that. You can say, I bet you are a brilliant celebrant. I asked Hugh Grant for a quote on my last book, and he said, I'm too busy to read it, but I'm sure it will be brilliant. And I said, can I put that on the cover? I'm too busy to read it, but I'm sure it will be brilliant. So you can't. There's always a little bit of editing needed in these sort of situations. Not that I'm comparing myself to him by any stretch of the imagination. 11 minutes after 12 is the time. I'm too nervous to call, James. But when I started working at a high-end estate agency in London, I remember when I started working there. I'm from a middle-class background and grew up near Clowes Top, which is a beautiful little village in Worcestershire, with a very famous butcher called Vic. When I started working at the estate agents, I seemed to be the only one who didn't have a double-barreled name and who wasn't related to the Queen. I think I can probably guess what estate agents you went to work for. At first, I really enjoyed being different within the working environment, but over time, I began to feel like the novelty act in the office. I was tasked with handling the core market, which, in retrospect, I think meant that they only wanted me speaking to people with more modest budgets and not dealing with the super rich. There were things I didn't understand and was made to feel stupid for doing so. For example, being laughed at for asking what stalking was. When a colleague said I'm going stalking on the weekend, yes, that could be quite confusing in modern times, couldn't it? It's not the sort of thing you boast about, unless, of course, you're going out shooting deer, which is what the colleague was presumably referring to. And I distinctly remember on one occasion one of the team laughing about how their niece said shower, because they all said shower. I'm going to have a shower. Who does this? Do we know someone who does? I'm going to have a shower. Have you had a shower today? Do you want to use the shower? Keith, if you want to use the shower? I was then asked how I pronounce shower, as some kind of reference to the pleb pronounce the word game. I can laugh about it all now, but at the time it made me feel very much an outsider. Having a shower. Bath is quite a weird one. There's not many people say bath as opposed to bath. Well, I'm going to have a bath. Have a windows. But I mean, but it's not class. It's snobbery that kicks in when people are pointing out the mistakes that you've made. I've got a couple of phone lines free, only two, so be quick. 0345 6060 973. Tilly's in Greenwich. Tilly, what would you like to say?
It's really similar to the guy's story you just read out. You can probably tell by I've got a London accent.
Yeah.
Slightly posher than it used to be.
Is it?
Purely because of work, which leads me on to my actual story about work. So I'm 33 now, but when I first started in my industry, I was 21. And I went and I got an apprenticeship at one of the biggest media agencies in the world. And my first day, I'll never forget, I sat down with my team and I got told by my boss to pick up the phone, make a call. And the entire floor, I remember just standing up from their desks. It was back in the day when the offices were full. Our office had about 12,000 people, and not specifically on that floor, but people were standing up to look at who had this accent. And I remember just feeling like a Dick Van Dyke sort of character. That's how I felt. And for weeks it went on, like people looking, like no one asked me anything. No one asked me where I was from. No one, I don't know, I wasn't given a great welcome, but I don't know if anyone was at that place.
Sure.
Because I don't work there anymore. I work a lot nicer. And I'm actually working at the minute for an apprenticeship program, specifically for working class kids. Because I noticed that I'm only one of two other people that I've ever met in my industry in the past, 12 years, who didn't go to university. So that's quite a big deal.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's massive. And then also, I was going to say that during my career, I don't know if it definitely hasn't hindered me in this one, like they're a great company, but previous employer that I had, I actually overheard that I was unable to participate in a client meeting. I weren't allowed to present because I was common.
Really?
Yes, yeah.
And they'd use that word, and so I mean that's relatively recently as well. They'd still say you're too common. Well, I need to ask what industry you're in, but you're probably not going to tell me.
No, I work in media. I like to work in the media industry specifically.
Okay. Well, that surprises me a bit because but then of course on the other hand it doesn't. The snobbery is as old as the hills. Crikey! I hope our paths cross, Tilly. I also sort of work in the media industry. 12:15 is the time. Are you going to tell the toast story, James? I told you I've only got 17 anecdotes. I might make a list of them one day. I might do if you're good. 18 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I just thought that Keir Starmer thing this morning was really interesting. Like a lot of people who are unhappy with the current regime, there are days when I wish Keir Starmer would show a little bit more ankle, as they used to say. But I'll tell you what's very, very interesting about him. And I wonder whether we've forgotten what honour sounds like in public life. And I know he is accused of flip-flopping and changing his mind and reverse engineering and reverse ferreting and all of that. And some of those accusations are valid. But personal honour, just think about that Sue Gray story and think about how ludicrously inflated it was. And then when he came in with Nick, he couldn't answer a relatively straight question. And you sat there thinking, that's very strange. What has he got to hide? And that's because we're a cynical bunch. But the reality was that he was abiding by the requests and requirements of the committee investigating the conversation investigating the appointment of Sue Gray. So ACOBA, not the Mickey Mouse committee that Simon Case threw up in a desperate attempt to make a story out of nothing. But the actual committee, the official inquiry, investigation into what she'd been doing. So remind yourself of, and this is, Nick did exactly what I would have done. There's no criticism of him involved in this. It's rather an examination of Keir Starmer, because think about, what I want you to bear in the back of your mind is that when Boris Johnson was investigated for contempt of Parliament, his response when he was given an early look at the report was to commit another contempt. He went public with the findings that he had only been allowed to see to allow him to prepare a response. He went public with them. He got his defence in before the judge had delivered his verdict. And that was appalling. The worst ever example of that, if you're wondering, was when a bloke called Matthew Elliott was allowed to respond to an Electoral Commission investigation into whether or not Vote Leave had broken electoral law 2 weeks before the report was published. The then political editor of the BBC, Laura Koonsberg, gave him a red carpet reception on BBC television to poo-poo a report that wasn't due to be published for 2 weeks. I've been reading about that last weekend, and I was there. I was paying attention at the time, but unbelievable story. So that practice from one side of British politics, when you are guilty of something, of using the media in order to get your defence out early, to sort of self-exculpate if you can, and then Starmer making a bit of a fool of himself in this studio with Nick because he was determined to do things correctly. So I just thought it was worth revisiting. So here he is making a bit of a fool of himself a few months ago.
When did you first approach Sue Gray to be your Chief of Staff?
Nick, I know her personally. I met her when I was Director of Public Prosecution. She was obviously a senior civil servant. I met a number of them. I was really, really impressed with her. So I've known her personally since then. She's not a friend. I don't mix with her. I'm not in the same social circles or anything like that. I know her personally in the sense that if I saw her at a reception or something, I would go over and have a discussion with her. But as I say, I actually haven't had a discussion with her during the entire time she was doing her report.
Might I ask when you first approached her to be your Chief of Staff?
I've been on the lookout for a Chief of Staff for a little while now. I'm very clear what I wanted in that. And obviously, Sue will set out that, but nothing improper at all. I've been on the lookout for a Chief of Staff. I'm really pleased that people of her calibre are interested in that.
So when did you approach, can I ask when you approached Sue?
Look,
if I may call her, Sue?
I've been looking for a Chief of Staff for a number of weeks now.
I think October 2022, Sam White left you, if I've got that.
Well, that's when I lost, when Sam White moved on. At that stage, the first task I had for myself was being clear in my own mind what I wanted from a Chief of Staff, because I was beginning to think about how to deliver.
So I will try again, and obviously you don't have to answer, but when did you first contact Sue Gray about the possibility of becoming your Chief of Staff?
Well, Nick, that's going to be laid out by Sue. She's got to do that as part of a leaving procedure. But there's nothing improper at all.
But you can't tell me that.
Nick, nothing improper at all.
No, but you can't tell me when you first approached her.
I've been looking for a Chief of Staff for a little while now, but Sue will lay that out.
Why won't you tell me, Sir Keir?
There's nothing improper at all.
No. But just answer why you won't tell me when you first made contact with her.
I'm not going to go through lock, stock and barrel, but there's nothing improper. It's not unusual.
But if it's not improper, I'm sorry to... If it's not improper, why won't you say, it was a month ago, Nick, or it was 6 weeks ago, Nick, or it was on New Year's Day?
It was. I've been looking for some time, and there's nothing improper in the slightest.
So you listened to that, as I did at the time, and you said, why can't he just answer the question? And I'll tell you why we were thinking to ourselves, why can't he just answer the question? We're just not used to politicians playing it by the book. Just not used to it. But Boris Johnson coming out, having been found guilty of contempt and being so contemptuous of the system that he commits another contempt. So this morning, you can hear, I just want you to listen to this, because you can sort of hear the combination of relief and retrospective embarrassment from Keir Starmer. The reason why he couldn't answer those questions a few months ago was because it was decorum, it was procedure, it was regulation, it was requirement. There was Sue Gray's role that needed to be explained by Sue Gray to the committee, and he couldn't be seen or heard to be sticking his oar in. It just occurred to me, look, he's a far from perfect politician, but my goodness me, what a relief to hear someone who actually plays by the rules, which is kind of what you'd expect from a former director of public prosecutions.
And Nick was frustrated with me last time I came on the programme because he said, what conversations did you have with Sue Gray? And I said, I'm going to have to wait for the committee because that's where we've put the evidence and they want us to wait until they've made a ruling.
Well, I also asked when. When did you have your first conversation?
Now, Nick, I can give you and Paul the full readout.
Is it unexpurgated?
It is. It was a short call. It was towards the end of October, Paul, and I phoned Sue. I've known Sue for a number of years. She's a phenomenal woman. I was looking for a chief of staff, and the conversation I had with her, which was a short conversation, which is, I'm looking for a chief of staff. If you were to leave the civil service, is this something that you might consider? Because I knew the rules, she knew the rules, and we left it at that. And then, Paul, I didn't speak to her again. That was the extent of it. The only caveat is when the leak came and she decided she would stand down, just before she stood down, I gave her a call to make sure she was all right and to find out what she was doing. But that, Paul, is the long and the short of it. And that's why I've always been confident in saying there was no breach of the code. I didn't discuss politics. I didn't discuss policy. I simply said, if you are to stand down at some point, would you be interested by being my chief of staff?
And just to clarify, that was in October?
That was in October,
months after the Partygate report was published?
Oh, yeah, months. I didn't speak to Sue Gray. The last time I saw Sue Gray before that was at a funeral some years beforehand. So I had no conversation with her then. I was simply making an inquiry, as happens all the time, which is, if you're to leave the job you're in, would you be interested in working for me? And we left it at that.
Why didn't you tell me that in March, Sakir?
Well, Nick, I was frustrated. The committee had asked Sue and me not that they should be the people who have this information first and they should be the people to consider it in the proper way. Now, that was frustrating for me because it's actually a very short story. I know what the rules are. Sue knows what the rules are. That's why we only had a brief conversation along those lines. If I wish the committee hadn't said, don't tell anyone until we've determined. But they've got their own process, which we respected. And, of course, they've said nothing was wrong.
Process, procedure, principle. I'd be interested to see whether the Daily Mail try and make something out of that tomorrow, because, of course, if you do the opposite, if you ride roughshod over process, if you urinate all over principle, and if you treat procedure with complete contempt, up to and including lying to the House of Commons, you get a column in the Daily Mail. Back to class. Ewan's in Torquay. Ewan, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James. First time caller.
Welcome.
I'm probably echoing a couple of the points that have already been made by some of your callers. I'm just a normal bloke, went to a comprehensive, but I went to Cambridge for my undergrad about 5 years ago. And, you go in, you've had this image of what it's going to be like for the posh people, and honestly, it's not as bad as you might think it is.
I think it's probably better now than it was when I was your age.
I think probably about nearly half, or maybe a little bit more than half of the people that go there are from comprehensives. Of course, they include grammar schools and that, but it's still a comprehensive. But there's just subtle things that stand out to you if you haven't been exposed to them before. So in your first week, you have your big formal dinner.
Yeah.
You're presented with sort of 14 bits of cutlery, and you just sort of try and follow suit to what everyone else is doing, which ones they're using.
That's solid advice, actually. Wait for someone else to start and just copy them.
Well, I tried copying, when I got past the canter report, I tried copying what everyone else did and passing it on to someone, but apparently there's a certain direction you've got to pass.
Did you pass it the wrong way?
Yeah.
I don't know what the right way is. Is it left?
No, nor do I.
Always goes left, I think, Port or something like that. Or you just pass it, just hoof it over the table. Oh, do you want a bit of this? But I presume by the time you were there, no one was going to be teasing you about that for the next 3 years. Oh, bloody Ewan didn't know. I
must say, no, I never faced any mocking or anything like that. It is interesting that you mentioned about, one of your callers mentioned about asking what school you went to.
Yes.
I did notice that, like, when in your first, few weeks, you start your new societies.
Yes.
And, it's almost like the second question that people ask each other. What school did you go? And then, do you know so-and-so? Do you know so-and-so? And I was thinking, that's so weird. Like, I couldn't work out in my head. Like,
how does that work?
You wouldn't know my school.
No. There's no malice in it from their point of view, but also, because I mean, that could have been me if I'd been in that context, I could have done that. And there's no malice in it. It just doesn't...
I don't think it was from a place of snobbery.
It's not... no, not snobbery. It just familiarity without realising how weird it is to everybody else.
Yeah. A friend of mine, he was from a similar background, but he joined a private school on a scholarship, and he explained to me it's sort of ingrained that people start networking at their secondary schools.
Yeah.
Networking was just a completely alien concept to me. And so these little things over the course of the 3 years, you try and assimilate. So I started pronouncing my T's a bit more in my lessons. And then I'd come back home after even just being away for term for 8 weeks. I'd come back and all my mates would be pointing out, why are you talking so posh?
They'd notice you can't win, can you?
I know, yeah. And then, I might have a lesson, for example, that would be in a different college. That they have the porters there, there's security, I guess, or the doors of the college. And you go to walk in, and you have to show a card, but you'd be stopped and sometimes quizzed, asked questions about your college because they didn't necessarily believe that you were there. Maybe because I was wearing maybe just a pair of tracky bottoms, or my hair was a bit shorter than most people's.
Yeah.
One interesting thing I did notice, though, is that I was sat around with a few of the mates from one of the societies.
Yeah.
And the discussion they were sort of calling each other. These were very privileged people.
Careful.
And they were calling each other posh.
Right.
As if to say, I'm not posh. You're posh.
Oh, I see.
You know what I mean? And it was sort of the opposite. They weren't being snobbish or anything, but they didn't want to be seen as posh. So it was better amongst themselves. It was, I don't know. They didn't want.
No, I like that. I get that. I think. Well, that's.
I was sat in the corner thinking it was just generally accepted that I was. I was the least posh, but yeah, it was.
It's a weird competition. So you're not. I'm not posh. I've only got one. I've only got four.
Only one of my parents is a surgeon. You know.
I've only got 2,000 acres.
Yeah, literally.
Well, that in a way, I think that stems possibly back to my generation when people started moving in the other direction. Do you remember you probably don't remember Keeping Up Appearances on the telly, but the comedy of people trying to be posher than they really are kind of got replaced by people getting mocked, getting teased for trying to sound less posh than they really were. Did you enjoy it? Did you have it sounds like you had a good time. You got stuck right in at Cambridge.
Yeah, I loved it, yeah. And like I said, everyone there was dead nice. You go with a bit of trepidation, but
yes.
I mean, I went as a mature student, so I didn't start till I was 24.
Right, you are.
So I was probably a bit more confident than I would have been.
In your own skin, confident in your own skin than you may have been at 18.
I'd imagine it would be quite a bit more daunting if you were just starting when you're 18. But, like I say, I didn't face any mocking, or I didn't witness any snobbery or anything like that.
No, not nastiness. I mean, some people are suggesting already, Ewan, in the text, that asking someone what school they went to is 100% snobbery. But I think we'd agree, you and me, that it's an accidental snobbery, because you are, of course, then excluding the 60, 70, 80% of people in the room that didn't go to the kind of school that means that you might know someone else who went to the same kind of school, even if it was the other end of the country. Largely boarding or London day schools, I'd have thought. They would be the two areas where you have that network. That's the word you used. But it is obviously discriminating, excluding to ask the question. But the people asking it were not doing it to make you feel alienated or excluded. They were doing it to build their own little network of security. But yeah, both positions are correct, I think. Ewan, thank you, mate. 12:32 is the time. Lottie Morley has your headlines. It is 12:36. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to stop doing the contrived, attempted comedy about the fact that nobody in this building considers me to be important enough to provide me with some production for my wizard wheezes and my hilarious features, so I end up having to do this. Dorries.
Watch.
It is now 28 days since Nadine Dorries pledged to resign as a Member of Parliament with immediate effect. Nadine Dorries is still a Member of Parliament. Dorries.
Watch.
I hope you're laughing with me, not at me. Astonishingly, Henry Riley, LBC's thrusting young political journalist, has come up with an extra layer of Dorries Watch.
That's right. James, Nadine Dorries, it's another anniversary for her today. It's been exactly a year since she spoke in the House of Commons. It was at 12 minutes past 10 on this day a year ago. This is what she said.
Mr. Speaker, the cost of living challenge in terms of energy costs, which we're all facing across all sectors, is a problem that the government is addressing. On his particular issue, as I said, we did support the leisure sectors throughout the pandemic. Conversations are taking place with the sectors as to the problems that they face and solutions that the government can help to find.
And since that statement in the House of Commons, she has not spoken on a single occasion in the chamber, leading to many campaigners in her constituency of Mid-Bedfordshire to feel shortchanged. Many of them are angry. They've told me it is gross neglect. Gareth McKee is one of the independent local councillors in her constituency.
I think it's quite ridiculous, really, and the people of Mid-Bedfordshire can and must expect better of those who represent them, to receive an entire salary and not speak once on issues in such important times where the economy is suffering, where people are suffering with the cost of living crisis. This gross neglect of her constituents is wholly unacceptable, and to claim the MP's salary for that time, I think, is really shortchanging the people of Mid-Bedfordshire.
I mean, this strikes me as extraordinary. That a whole year. I mean, when you gave me a quick heads up on what this story was about, I didn't think it would be a year. What would be normal? I mean, would other backbenchers be sitting there thinking, I hope old Scoop Hound Riley doesn't come after me next. I haven't given a speech in the House of Commons for 18 months. Or is it abnormal conduct?
It's not very normal at all. I was going through the only time it really happens is with people like Chris Pincher, who've been suspended by their parties, and there's an investigation.
He's not allowed to make
exactly. It's the same with David Warburton as well, who is the MP for Somerton and Frome. So it is not usual. And incidentally, that's a question I put to a parliamentary expert. Elliot Wilson is a former clerk of the House of Commons.
It's very unusual. I mean, in the old days, sort of 50, 60 years ago, it would perhaps be less unusual. But, speaking in the chamber and submitting questions and participating in select committees, these are the kind of bread and butter things that members can do, both to, advance constituency interests, but also to scrutinise the government, to chase their own political agenda. It's extraordinary that she's been quite so inactive for a full calendar year. I mean, it does look as if she's sort of carrying out a sort of grudge or a vendetta, as if she didn't get her way, so she's just going to completely not participate at all. And I don't think that's very good reputationally for her or for the House of Commons, actually.
And a few of Ms. Dorries' constituents, I should say, are not too happy with it, really. I've been looking at the sort of number crunching in terms of that time. She's earned £84,754 as in her capacity as an MP. She was a Minister, Secretary of State, for 61 days in the last year. That gives her £11,281. Just last week, she declared a partial advance for a new book. That was because of 100 hours work earlier this year, earning her £20,500. And she's also earned royalties of £10,647. Now, we don't know if she's claimed her ministerial severance package. If she has, that would give her nearly £17,000. And interestingly, James, that totals £144,538 since she last spoke in the chamber. But she hasn't declared any of her earnings as a TV presenter, which, of course, she's been doing once a week, and also a weekly column with a popular newspaper as well. So it's a lot of money. And, of course, as you referenced in Dorries Watch, it's been a long time since she said she would actually stand down as a Member of Parliament.
28 days, Henry.
28 days. Dr. Alice Lilly, a senior researcher from the Institute for Government, told me that also was unprecedented.
It's an incredibly unusual situation. So, as you say, Ms. Dorries said that she would step down as an MP, but then what she has not done is actually taken the kind of formal steps that would allow her to resign. So yes, technically she remains an MP, even though she has indicated she will be standing down. And obviously what that means is that her constituents are left in a bit of a limbo because they simply don't know when there may be a by-election to replace their MP, and it's not really clear exactly what her status is at this point.
Just to say,
say, James, as well, I have contacted Nadine Dorries for comment, and she has previously said on the issue that she is waiting for answers from ministers with regards to a specific issue.
On the resignation issue, not on the question of why she hasn't said a word.
Yes, on the resignation issue.
Well, she can hardly claim she was busy. It's just extraordinary. And of course, I mean, you alluded to this. I will be a little bit more clear. This kind of conduct, this kind of politician gets rewarded by a television programme on Rupert Murdoch's news station and a column in the Daily Mail alongside Boris Johnson, who gets rewarded for being running away from parliamentary scrutiny, having been found guilty of committing contempt of Parliament on more than one occasion. Henry Riley, great stuff. Thank you very much. It is 12:42. Back to the phone calls, back to the question of class. Sean is in Sheffield. Sean, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Great show as usual.
Thank you.
So, I have had a couple of these kind of glass door moments in my past. One at school and one at university.
Go on.
So, first of all, the first one I was in 1984. I won a competition, National Schools Public Speaking Champion. So
Was it the English Speaking Union?
No, it was done by Lloyds Bank.
Was
the
it Lloyds
Bank
Bank
trophy? Yeah, and it was National Schools Public Speaking Champion, and I was at the final, at the national final, and we all had a programme of the order that we were speaking in, and I was going last. And a chap from, I don't know exactly what school, I can't, it's going back, It's going back 39 years, so it's a long while. But he was from a fee paying school. And when he heard me talking to one of the other competitors, he just turned to me and he said, "What are you doing here?"
No.
And I said, "Well, same thing that you are. I'm entering this competition." "But why?" And I was like, because I've been encouraged to do this. "Well, you're wasting your time."
Are you serious?
Okay. Yeah. In his opinion, because he'd seen that I came from Cartoonist Comprehensive School, I was wasting my time. But at the end, obviously, he was proved wrong, and I won the competition, which was fantastic. The second one, and it's similar to your Croots moment. I was in my first year at university in Manchester, and I'm working in the Hall of Residence bar, and we used to cash cheques for our fellow students.
Yes, I remember.
They would come in with a cheque, and we always asked for a cheque guarantee card. Standard practice, always ask for a cheque guarantee card. So one evening, a group of young girls came in. One presented me with a Coots cheque, and I said, "Oh, can I have your guarantee card?" The whole bunch of them just burst into fits of laughter.
No.
And she said, "Darling, I'm with Coots. Our checks are all guaranteed."
Yes, it's true, isn't it?
And it's like, and she said, "It's the Queen's Bank." And I was like, "Oh,
but how could they? I mean, was it good-natured laughter, or were they trying to make you feel?
I mean, well, I don't know. I think they were just shocked that I had no idea.
How could you know that though? Nobody. I went to public school. I didn't know that until I came out of university. That you.
I had no idea, and I don't think there
beggars.
was malice. I don't think there was malice involved. I just think that they had no concept of anyone not knowing who Coots were.
Sorry, I don't think I'd heard of it until I moved to London. It's outrageous. I was worried then, because I think that competition you won was the British Junior Chamber of Commerce, sponsored by Lloyds Banks.
That's it. That's the one.
Yeah, because I was worried then that you were going to drop me in it and say it was you. But I didn't enter it for 4 more years. I came in 4 years later and I didn't win the nationals. I only won the regionals. But it would have been the same round. It would have been the same regional. Yeah. I think we did. Was it Leeds Town Hall? Was it Leeds City Hall that you did the regional final in? Can you remember?
Our regional one was at High Melton College, just outside Doncaster.
No,
which
that was
a former teacher training.
No, it must have been different. 4 years later, I'd have been the cocky little public schoolboy, but I never would have been. I would never have been that rude to you. But I'll tell you what, I'd have been gutted when you won, though.
Oh yeah, I mean, the nice thing to that story is that, unbeknownst to me, obviously, we went for the weekend. It was at Haydock Park Racecourse, the national final.
Yeah.
And my teacher took me across there, and we were put up in a lovely hotel.
Oh, lovely.
Fantastic. And on the day, what I didn't know is that my parents had booked a coach.
Oh.
and all my friends and family had turned up from school.
Get in.
So, and I had no idea, literally, until I went out to speak. And I started noticing faces in the crowd that I recognised.
And it helped. It didn't throw you. It could have thrown you.
Not in the slightest. It just spurred me on, and I thought, yeah, this is it. And they obviously believed in me, and it just spurred me on. And my speech was delivered in my own dialect, but I also, because I'm a mimic, I was also copying a Geordie dialect, a Scottish dialect as well. So there was a lot of humour in the speech, and at the end, when they announced that I'd won, a huge cheer went up. I could see my schoolmates all in tears. It was fantastic. And then we went home. I went back on the coach with everybody. I mean, Mum and Dad they took us to local off licence, bought a bunch of cider. We shouldn't have done, but. We had a party, and it was absolutely wonderful.
What a result! What a result! I love that.
It's great. I mean, but I'm, I love the fact that I've got a Yorkshire accent. I love the fact that I've got a fairly working class accent.
Yeah.
I can articulate myself in different company, which is necessary at times. But what I worry about sometimes is that the language seems to be standardising itself.
Yeah.
The dialects are starting to fade a little bit. No matter where I think there's a kind of almost like a standard urban accent.
Because of TikTok, probably, and watching it, I don't know, maybe.
Social media.
Everyone
absolutely.
Drinking from the same trough.
The little inflection up at the end of the sentence, that kind of thing. And it's just, I hope that ours is not the last generation that truly holds on to that dialect.
I don't think it would be. There must be kids in Sheffield who sound just like you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I tell you, I've just remembered something else from that competition. Did you get a giant cheque?
Yes.
Do you remember? I got, because you went to the national, but like when you see them in the telly when they've won the pools. I got one for 15 quid, Sean. It was like the cheque was the size of a coffin, and I had to stand there shaking hands with the mayor, and it was for £15. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, we got £5 for the local.
Yeah.
We got £15 for regional.
Yes.
And it was £100 for the national final. And I'm just looking behind me, and I've still got my glass trophy.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
On the shelf.
I'm not surprised.
After all these years.
Happy day. I tell you what, it's a good job you're 4 years older than me, mate. Otherwise, I'd have had you.
I'm sure it would have been a good battle.
I think it would as well. Oh, blimey, get us. Take care, mate. That was lovely. Thank you, Sean. It's just very late for the break, but I think it was worth it. It's 12:52. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Completely by coincidence, this week's Full Disclosure touches on quite a lot of the territory that we've been discussing this week, and today and yesterday in particular, with regards to Oracy. I am an enormous admirer of Alan Titchmarsh. He's one of the nicest people. That sounds a bit insipid, nicest. He's just one of the most quality people I've met in this business, and I've known him for quite a long time. I just really like him. But you probably do realise he's a superb broadcaster, a truly consummate broadcaster. And we talked a lot about that during Full Disclosure, but obviously we also talked about gardening. And we talked about aspiration, about coming from backgrounds that do not necessarily create people who might expect to end up somewhere where Alan has ended up. It's a really, really lovely Full Disclosure, a really lovely episode. In fact, I would say if you listen to it, you could be forgiven for thinking that there must have been an open fire burning while we spoke. It feels like a fireside chat, and I loved it. And there was a lot about him I didn't know. There was some crossover with my own family, with my own life. My dad's first newspaper was the Shipley Times. Up near Leeds, and his college that he went to after leaving school at 15 and doing an apprenticeship for the local council was Shipley College. So some lovely crossover there. We both got Yorkshire connections, which brings us back to Sean, who was on just before the last break. And it's just a really lovely one. So, make sure you download it. Make sure you have a proper listen to this. It will, I guarantee it will put a smile on your face. And I think the clip we've got starts with some talk about the old gardening. For somebody who is utterly unmoved by your passions. How do you describe, what is the thing you get? What is the feeling, even at that age, that you would have, and that presumably the foreman saw that you had, and another lad who turned up at 15, he wouldn't have thought would have had that path in front of him?
It's a cross between aptitude and affinity. Yeah. It's a comfortableness with things that grow, and a passion for them. And I never feel more content ever anywhere than when I'm in a garden or when I'm in the countryside with plants. I vividly remember Seamus Heaney saying when he won the Nobel Prize that he wanted to spend the money to go on a course so he could walk through woodland and know what he was looking at. And I thought, and I do. And I love being able to say, that's an ash tree, that's a beech, that's a wood anemone, that's an oak. And I like that knowledge, not because knowledge is power, but I like to feel connected to it, and I do feel connected to it. And, if people ever say to you, what do you want to be remembered for? I don't particularly want or need to be remembered, but I'd like to leave behind a better piece of landscape than I inherited. And that, for me, it's the stuff of life.
Are you imposing order on chaos a bit with both of those things, knowing the names of stuff, but also you're not taming nature, are you? You're harnessing it.
No, but I'm harnessing it, and I'm making it please me and humanity, as well as growing well in itself. And I think sometimes we forget there's so much emphasis now on the harm that we're doing, and quite right too. But we do have a place here. We are a part of it. And sometimes just to make yourself absolutely ridden with guilt is not an either productive or a positive way forward. And I'd rather work always with nature, but as you say, harnessing her, and in the old words of Sam Goldwyn, making something bigger than both of us. But I do like impressing order on it. I'd be disingenuous if I said no, I don't. I like making it even more beautiful. There's a lovely story about Capability Brown, the great landscaper, and somebody said to him once, I hope I die before you do, Mr. Brown. And Brown said, why? He said, because I want to see heaven before you've improved it. So there's always that at the back of your mind.
It's just lovely, it really is. And I found it quite moving, actually. We're talking about his dad and stuff. You'll love it, trust me. It is 12:57. Apologies, I'm not going to have time for all the calls that are waiting, but I will squeeze in at least one more, and it's David in Walton-on-Thames. David, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, you'll hear from my accent that I've got a West Country accent, but in other ways, I'm very much like you. I went to a public school on a scholarship. Right. And they tried to knock my accent out of me with elocution lessons, and I just didn't do it. My mum and dad wanted me to, but I just didn't see why I should. Gosh. And then but then the changes, because then I went to a Newcastle University, and I found that people thought I was a yokel and thick because of my West Country accent. Not working class, but just thick. Oh. And that has been all my life. I've just got really irritated by the fact that programs like Doc Martin and things like that have this weird feeling that we're all either pirates or stupid.
A yokel, is that? I mean, that's the thing.
Yokel.
Isn't it?
I mean, that's it. A local yokel. And I mean, so in the end, what I did is I remember one interview. The guy at the end of it said, you enjoyed cheerful self-denigration? Because that was the only thing. I just made a joke of it, you know? Sure. Because that's the only way. But I worked all my life for an American company. The Americans never had any problem because they just didn't recognise my accent. And I ended up running their project management department. And, nobody ever took me less than seriously as an engineer. But if I ever met people for the first time, it was like, oh, did you actually go to university?
That's
somebody
ridiculous.
actually once said that to me
Really?
in a big customer meeting them, and I mentioned it. He said something about, I went to Newcastle University. I said, I went to Newcastle University. He said, did you go to university? Because they thought I'd dragged myself up from the farm to get a decent
falling
job,
off the back of the combine harvester or something like that.
Exactly.
That's ridiculous. What was it? I haven't got long, but what was it about young you that resisted the pressure from home and school or college to fit in more?
I guess I'm just bullshit.
And we need a lot more of that. David, thank you. What a lovely story. What a lovely show. Thank you. Hey, it wasn't lovely in the first half, was it? It was grim, but I think we've managed to put some smiles on some faces. If you missed any of it, you can listen back on Global Player, on Catch Up, where you can rewind live radio or enjoy the whole show podcast. You can also get the whole of that lovely interview on Full Disclosure with Alan Titchmarsh. Rewind live radio on Global Player. Download for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now. 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 Sheila